I turned 50 the night everything finally clicked. My name's Grant, and I've spent most of my life being the family's afterthought. You know that invisible middle child stereotype? Yeah, that was me, except I wasn't even in the middle. I was just there. My younger brother, Brian, was the golden one. Always had been. When he got a C, it was because the teacher was biased. When I got an A, it was finally. He got a car at 16. I got to borrow it when he didn't need it. He crashed it 2 months later, and somehow I ended up blamed for not reminding him about oil changes. That's the kind of family dynamic we had. So when my 50th birthday rolled around, I didn't expect fireworks. I didn't even expect sincerity. My mom was the kind of woman who could turn any moment about someone else into a celebration of her sacrifice. My dad was quiet, passive, the sort who avoided confrontation by pretending not to hear it. And Brian, well, Brian had a talent for timing. If I won an award, he'd announce a new job. If I got engaged, he'd accidentally get engaged 2 weeks later. Even at my own wedding, he made a toast that ended with, "But let's not forget," without me introducing them. They wouldn't even be together. Still, I wanted to believe this birthday would be different. 50 felt big. A milestone. Maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me with a bit of warmth. My wife, Julia, insisted I book a nice restaurant, one I'd always wanted to try but kept pushing off. "Let's celebrate you properly," she'd said, squeezing my hand. I loved her for that. She'd been my anchor through all the years of being quietly dismissed. The restaurant was one of those high-end places where they bring out tiny plates and charge you for the air you breathe, but I didn't care. It was my night. I walked in wearing a navy suit, feeling, dare I say, good about myself. The lights were warm, the music subtle, and the table was set perfectly in the center of the private dining room. I spotted my parents first, Mom waving dramatically like she was the star of a Broadway play, Dad smiling politely beside her. And then Brian. Tan, confident, that rehearsed grin that never reached his eyes. "Grant, happy birthday, big brother," he said, pulling me into one of those half hugs that's really a pat down for dominance. "Man, 50. You don't look a day over 49. He laughed at his own joke, and everyone else joined in. I smiled, the kind of smile you learn when you've spent a lifetime not wanting to ruin the mood. "Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it." The dinner started off pleasant enough. Wine flowing, polite conversation, Mom telling the waiter her life story like she was auditioning for a documentary. But I noticed something as the night went on. Every time someone mentioned me, Brian found a way to pivot the attention back to himself. When Dad said, "We're proud of what you've accomplished, son," Brian chimed in, "Yeah, success runs in the family." When Julia mentioned how hard I'd worked to build my company from the ground up, Brian cut in, "Speaking of building, my real estate investments are doing amazing this year." Even Mom giggled and said, "Well, Brian's always had that business sense. You got that from me." I glanced at Julia across the table. She caught my eye and gave me that small, knowing look, the one that said, "It's starting again." I could feel my chest tighten, but I stayed quiet. I'd learned that arguing with Brian was like trying to reason with thunder. You just end up getting struck. Then came the moment that sealed the night in my memory. The waiter rolled out the cake, a 3-tiered chocolate masterpiece that Julia had custom ordered. Candles flickered, everyone clapped, and for a split second, I felt seen. The song started, voices overlapping in messy harmony, and I closed my eyes, making a wish. I didn't wish for money or luck, just peace. But before I could even blow out the candles, Brian stood up. Wait, before you cut the cake," he said loudly, raising his glass. Everyone turned to him, confused but smiling. My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. Too cheerful, too rehearsed. He clinked his spoon against his glass and continued. "I think we should also take a moment to celebrate something else tonight. It's been a huge week for me." He paused dramatically, letting the suspense build like he was hosting a reality show. "I just bought a new house." The table erupted in cheers. My mom gasped, "Oh my baby, I knew you would," and rushed to hug him. Dad laughed proudly. Even the waiter smiled awkwardly, not sure whether to clap. And me? I just sat there, the candles still burning in front of me, the wax dripping slowly into the frosting. Brian grinned wide. "Yeah, it's this gorgeous place on Meadowbrook Lane. 5 bedrooms, pool, great neighborhood. I've been keeping it a secret until the papers were signed." Mom dabbed her eyes. He's always been the star, she said, her voice thick with pride. Always destined for greatness. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was quieter, heavier, like realizing you've been standing in the wrong line your whole life. I stared at the cake, untouched. Everyone was clapping, laughing, talking about Brian's new house, and my name, my birthday, was gone from the conversation. Julia leaned toward me. Grant, she whispered softly, resting her hand on my knee. I smiled. Or maybe it was more like I put on the mask I'd worn for decades. It's fine, I murmured, voice steady. He needs the spotlight more than I need the moment. But I wasn't fine. Not really. Not anymore. The rest of the dinner blurred together. I heard Brian boasting about square footage, Mom asking if there was room for future grandkids to visit, Dad muttering something about refinancing options. I laughed at the right times, nodded politely, and pretended the ache in my chest was just indigestion. When the bill came, Brian even joked, "Hey Grant, since it's your birthday, you're covering this, right?" Everyone laughed. Everyone except Julia. She looked like she was biting her tongue hard enough to bleed. On the drive home, silence filled the car. The kind of silence that hums. Finally, Julia said, "He stole your night." I exhaled slowly. He's been stealing my nights since we were kids. She turned to me, her eyes fierce even in the dim light. Then maybe it's time you stop letting him. I didn't respond right away. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. Her words echoed in my head like a challenge I'd avoided too long. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Brian's new house wasn't entirely his. And the irony? The name on that deed was about to turn his little celebration into something unforgettable. That was the night I stopped being invisible. And as I stared out the window at the passing streetlights, a calm, deliberate thought formed in my mind, slow, precise, unshakable. It was time to give him the kind of attention he'd never forget. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, like I always did. Old habit from years of building my company. Early mornings, long hours, no handouts. I made myself coffee, sat on the porch, and tried to let the cold air wash away the taste of last night. But it stuck, that bitter mix of humiliation and déjà vu 50 years old, and I still felt like that awkward 12-year-old who watched his little brother unwrap my Christmas present because Brian just wanted it more. Julia came out a few minutes later, wrapped in my robe, her hair messy and eyes tired. "You didn't sleep, did you?" I shook my head, staring at the steam rising from my cup. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard him say it again. "Let's also celebrate me." Like my birthday was just a prelude to his announcement. She sat beside me, quiet for a moment. "You've let them do this for too long," she finally said. "You let your mom rewrite history, your brother take credit, your dad stay silent. And every time, you just smile through it." I didn't argue, because she was right. I'd always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, avoided conflict, told myself that keeping the family together was worth swallowing my pride. But last night, watching Brian steal my moment, I realized something. Peace doesn't mean silence. It just means everyone else gets to keep talking. I spent that weekend thinking, not just about Brian, but about all the times my parents had made it clear who really mattered. When Brian wanted to start a landscaping business at 22, my parents gave him $30,000. When it failed 6 months later, they told everyone, "At least he tried. He's ambitious." When I asked for a small loan at 25 to buy equipment for my contracting company, my mother scoffed, "You think we're made of money?" So I worked nights, saved, and did it on my own. My company grew, slowly, painfully, but I never flaunted it. Maybe that was my mistake. In my family, humility looked like weakness. 2 weeks after my birthday, Mom called. "Grant, sweetheart, we're all going to Brian's new house this weekend. He wants to host a family dinner and show everyone around. Isn't that exciting?" I hesitated. "Did he invite me?" "Of course," she said, her voice tightening slightly. "Your family. Don't be petty." Petty. That was her favorite word for me, her shield whenever she didn't want to admit favoritism. I almost said no, but something in me wanted to go. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. I needed to see it with my own eyes, the house he bragged about like it was his crowning achievement. Saturday came. Julia and I drove over, the GPS leading us through a quiet upscale neighborhood lined with manicured lawns and imported cars. The kind of place that screamed new money. When we pulled up to the address, I recognized it immediately. Meadowbrook Lane. I'd been there before, twice, actually. Once to inspect the foundation for the renovation project, and again to finalize the property paperwork. Because, you see, that house wasn't just familiar. It was mine. Technically, the house belonged to an investment LLC under my company's name. I'd bought it a few months earlier as part of a rental portfolio expansion. It wasn't unusual for me to acquire properties anonymously through the company for tax purposes. Brian had no idea. Julia glanced at me as I parked across the street. "You're quiet." I smiled faintly, just thinking how poetic life can be. The front door opened, and there he was, Brian in a fitted polo, sunglasses perched on his head like he was starring in a real estate commercial. "Grant, Julia, glad you made it." The house was filled with laughter and noise. Cousins, uncles, aunts, everyone crowding the space like it was some royal debut. Mom was near the kitchen, showing off the marble countertops as if she'd designed them herself. "This is your house, Brian?" Uncle Rick asked, wide-eyed. "Wow, you've outdone yourself, kid." Brian beamed. "Yeah, it's been a long time coming. Hard work pays off, right?" I almost laughed. Hard work. The man's biggest achievement until now was avoiding actual work. Mom turned to me, hand on her hip. "Grant, don't look so serious. You could learn a thing or two from your brother. He's always had drive." Julia stiffened beside me, but I placed a hand on hers, silently telling her to let it go. "Not yet." We took the tour, the open-concept living room, the spacious backyard, the guest suite. Every corner reminded me of the meetings I'd had with contractors, the permits I'd approved, the notes I'd signed. My signature was on nearly every document that made this house possible. At one point, I walked into the study, a room with built-in shelves and a huge window overlooking the lawn. There was a stack of envelopes on the desk, one of them addressed to the LLC name I used for the property. I recognized the logo instantly. "Everything okay, Grant?" Brian asked behind me, his tone casual but watchful. "Just admiring the place," I said, smiling slightly. "You really went all out." He grinned. "Yeah, well, when you've got the right connections, things move fast. Not everyone's cut out for big investments like this, you know." I nodded slowly. "Guess not." Later that evening, during dinner, Mom raised a toast. "To my son Brian," she said, glass high and voice proud, "who's finally settled into a home worthy of his potential." Everyone clapped. I set my fork down, staring at my plate. Julia leaned over and whispered, "You okay?" "Fine," I murmured, but my pulse said otherwise. Brian smirked across the table. "Don't look so tense, big bro. Your time will come. Maybe when you stop overthinking everything and just go for it." The table laughed. It was the same dynamic as always, Brian dazzling the room, me cast as the responsible, boring one. And the worst part? They liked it that way. They needed someone to be the dull contrast to Brian's golden glow. But that glow was borrowed light, and I was finally ready to take it back. The next few days, I played it calm. I went to work, met with clients, managed projects, all while quietly preparing. I didn't tell Julia everything yet, just that I was working on something. She trusted me enough not to ask more. Then the calls started. First from Mom. "Sweetheart, Brian's having some trouble with the paperwork for the property taxes. He says something about a mix-up with the deed. Could you take a look?" "A mix-up? Interesting." Then from Brian himself, the next day. "Hey man, just a small favor. I think the county office messed up the registration on my house. There's this company name showing up on some documents. Yours, I think. Weird, right? Probably a clerical error." "Probably," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Send me the paperwork. I'll check it out." When I got the email, I opened the attachments, and there it was. My company name, clear as day, right above the deed holder's signature line. Mine. Brian had been living in my house, throwing parties, boasting to everyone about his purchase, and never once realizing the paperwork never changed hands. He'd signed a rental agreement I'd written up for internal occupancy, thinking it was mortgage verification. He hadn't read the fine print. He never did. For years, Brian had taken advantage of my silence. But this time, his own arrogance had done the heavy lifting. I didn't confront him right away. No, that would have been too easy, too satisfying, too soon. I wanted him to dig himself deeper, to make his lies big enough that when they collapsed, everyone would hear the echo. So I played along. I showed up at family gatherings. I smiled when Mom bragged about Brian's latest milestone. I even congratulated him publicly, all while keeping my plans quiet. At one dinner, I overheard him telling an uncle, "Grant means well, but he's just not the risk-taking type. That's why I'll always be a step ahead." Julia later told me she saw my jaw clench. "He doesn't even realize he's digging his own grave," she whispered. No, he didn't. But soon he would. Because my 50th birthday hadn't just been a night of humiliation, it had been a wake-up call. And I wasn't going to let another decade pass being invisible. The moment was coming. I could feel it building, slow and deliberate, like pressure under glass. I just needed to wait for the right time to let it shatter. It took less than a month for Brian to cross the line, the kind of line that once it's crossed, there's no going back. I'd spent weeks quietly watching him bask in attention, soaking up every ounce of praise from our family. Every dinner, every call from Mom, every, "You should be more like your brother," jab. It was the same movie I'd seen my whole life. Only this time, I wasn't the passive audience member. I was the one writing the ending. The first crack appeared one Sunday afternoon when Dad called. He rarely called on his own. Usually, it was Mom putting him on speaker while she did the talking. But this time, his voice was low and uncertain. "Grant, your brother's got himself in a bit of a jam," he said. "Something about his new house and the bank." I kept my tone neutral. "What kind of jam?" He hesitated. "He says they're threatening to freeze his account until he clears up some issue with ownership verification. He mentioned your name, said you might have accidentally been listed somewhere on the paperwork." Accidentally. There it was again, that magical word Brian used whenever his recklessness backfired. "I see," I said. "And he wants me to fix it?" "Well, yeah," Dad said awkwardly. "He's under a lot of stress. Your mother thinks you should help, since you're better with this stuff." I could practically hear Mom in the background, whispering instructions like a stage director. "Tell him not to overreact. It's just a mix-up." A mix-up. Always a mix-up, never accountability. I told Dad I'd look into it, and hung up. That same evening, Brian called. "Hey, man," he started casually. "We've got a little problem, but it's nothing major. The bank's just being ridiculous about the property title." "Uh-huh," I said, leaning back in my chair. "And what did you tell them?" "That we're brothers, and that you probably handled the closing paperwork under your company for convenience," he said quickly. "They just need you to confirm that I'm the rightful owner. Easy fix." I let that sit for a second. "Brian, you told the bank I handled your property under my company?" "Well, yeah," he said. "I mean, it's true, kind of. You were involved in the process, right? Look, I just need you to send them a letter verifying that the house is mine. That'll clear it up." "That would be lying," I said quietly. He paused. "No, it's just bending the truth a little. You know how paperwork is." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I looked around my office. The framed architectural plans, the company logo I designed 20 years ago, the first project photo still hanging crooked on the wall. Every inch of that room was built from work, not handouts. And now he wanted me to hand him legitimacy on a silver platter. "Brian," I said slowly, "you're living in a house you don't own. You've been parading it around like it's your big accomplishment, and you didn't even read the contract you signed. That's on you." He laughed lightly, that fake, dismissive laugh he used when he was cornered. "Come on, man, don't get dramatic. We're family. It's not like you're losing anything. Just fix it so Mom can stop freaking out." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "No." There was a long silence. Then he said, quietly but sharply, "You've always been jealous of me. You know that? You can't stand seeing me get attention." And just like that, I hung up. I thought that would be the end of it, that maybe, finally, he'd realize he'd crossed a boundary. But Brian didn't back down. He never did. Instead, he doubled down. 3 days later, I got a call from my accountant. "Grant, I've got something strange here," he said. "Someone tried to file a transfer authorization for one of your LLC properties. The Meadowbrook one." My stomach dropped. "What?" "Yeah," he said. "They used an old digital signature template. It's a sloppy forgery, but the intention's clear. They're trying to reassign ownership to an individual named Brian Caldwell. That's your brother, right?" I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. "Send me the document." Now, when I opened the email, I felt my pulse quicken. The signature was mine, or at least, someone's attempt at it. Same slant, same spacing, but just slightly off. Like someone had traced it from memory. The rest of the form was filled out with confident handwriting, Brian's. He hadn't just lied. He'd tried to steal it. I stared at the screen, disbelief turning to a slow, cold anger. I'd dealt with betrayal before, friends who took credit for my work, employees who lied, but never from my own brother, never this blatant. That night, I didn't tell Julia everything. Not yet. I needed to think clearly before emotions got in the way. But she could tell something was wrong. What happened? She asked softly as we sat in bed. He crossed a line, I said simply. And this time, it's not just words. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. Mom answered the door with her usual dramatic flair, like I'd just shown up for a surprise reunion episode. Grant, what brings you here? Did you come to talk about helping Brian? Oh, thank God. I told your father you'd come to your senses. Where is he? I asked, stepping inside. She frowned. He's out running errands for the house. You know, being responsible. I turned to face her. Mom, did you know Brian tried to forge my signature on a legal document? Her eyes flickered, a quick, guilty reaction before her expression smoothed out. Oh, for heaven's sake, don't exaggerate. He said he made a small mistake trying to fix a filing error. I almost laughed. A forgery is not a small mistake, Mom. It's a crime. She crossed her arms, defensive now. You've always been so uptight. He's your brother. You can't just hold that over his head. If you really love this family, you'd help him out instead of threatening him. Help him out. I repeated, incredulous. By letting him steal from me? Her voice rose. He needs this, Grant. He's finally doing something with his life. Do you want to ruin it? That sentence hit like a punch, because it was the same one she'd used my whole life in different forms. Don't ruin it for him. Don't upset him. Don't make him look bad. I realized then that it wasn't just Brian. It never had been. It was the entire system that had been built around him. The blind worship, the excuses, the protection. I'm done, I said quietly. Mom frowned. Done with what? With pretending this family's definition of love isn't just control. I turned to leave, but she called after me, her voice sharp and shaking. If you go through with whatever you're planning, don't expect to be welcome here again. I stopped at the doorway, glancing back over my shoulder. Funny, I can't remember the last time I actually felt welcome. I walked out without another word. By the time I got home, Julia was waiting in the kitchen, her phone in hand. You need to see this, she said, her voice tense. It was a Facebook post, Brian, standing in front of the Meadowbrook house, arm around Mom, grinning wide. The caption read, "Dreams do come true. After years of hard work and dedication, I'm finally a homeowner. Couldn't have done it without my amazing family support. Here's to new beginnings." The comments were flooded with praise. So proud of you. You deserve it. Finally getting what you worked for. I stared at the screen, the words blurring. He's unbelievable. Julia looked at me, eyes narrowing. Grant, this isn't just about him anymore. He's dragging your name, your work, your life into his fantasy. You need to do something. And that's when it clicked. The letter, the forgery, the post, it wasn't a coincidence. He was trying to rewrite the story before I could tell the truth. He was building a public image so loud that no one would believe me if I contradicted it. I'd always been quiet, measured, careful. He'd always been reckless, loud, careless. But this time, his carelessness had put him on my territory, the one place where I held all the cards, the paperwork. That night, I opened my files and began pulling every document tied to Meadowbrook. I double-checked ownership logs, tax records, digital signatures. I had everything, proof beyond question. But I didn't send them to anyone. Not yet. Because I wasn't going to expose him in an email or a phone call. No, Brian had humiliated me publicly, at my birthday, in front of family, online. And when it came time to reveal the truth, he'd learn exactly what it felt like to lose everything while everyone was watching. I just needed the right moment. And as fate would have it, that moment was already on the calendar. Mom's upcoming family celebration dinner that she'd been planning for weeks to toast Brian's success. Perfect. I marked the date on my phone and smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't dreading a family gathering. Because this one wasn't going to be about him anymore. It was going to be about the truth. The weeks leading up to Mom's family celebration dinner felt heavier than usual, like the air itself carried the weight of everything unsaid. On the surface, life went on. I still showed up to work, shook hands with clients, laughed at the right times, signed contracts, and played my part as the calm, dependable one. But under it all, there was this quiet storm brewing. I didn't show it, not even to Julia. But every time I scrolled past Brian's smug social media posts or heard my mother's voice bragging about her successful son, it twisted something deep inside me. It wasn't just anger, it was something older, deeper, a kind of grief. For the years I'd wasted trying to earn their approval. For every time I'd swallowed an insult and told myself it wasn't worth fighting. For all the dinners where Brian was the star and I was the afterthought. I wasn't just angry at them. I was angry at me. The night before the dinner, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my office, the only light coming from the monitor where the documents glowed faintly. The deed, the ownership certificate, the bank filings. All in my name. Ironclad. Untouchable. I could have exposed him then. One email, one phone call, one screenshot to the right person, and Brian's little empire of lies would have collapsed overnight. But I didn't press send. Because part of me, the part that had always wanted peace, still hesitated. I wanted to believe there was some way to make them see reason without blowing everything up. I wanted to believe that family could still mean something. Julia came into the office around midnight, her robe loosely tied, hair falling across her face. "You're still up," she said quietly. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. She came behind me, resting her chin on my shoulder, her voice soft. "You've already won, you know. You don't have to prove it to them." I let out a long breath. I'm not sure it's about winning anymore. I think I just want to stop losing. She wrapped her arms around me. "Then maybe it's time you walk away." Her words lingered long after she'd gone back to bed. Walk away. Simple advice, impossible to follow. Because walking away meant letting them rewrite the story one last time. And I wasn't sure I could live with that. The next day, I got a call from Mom. Cheerful, rehearsed, fake as ever. "Sweetheart, don't forget the dinner tonight. Everyone's so excited to see you. And we're something nice. Brian's got a surprise planned." I smiled bitterly. "A surprise, huh? I'll be there." This celebration dinner was held at the same restaurant as my birthday, the one where Brian had stolen my night. There was something poetic about that. Julia noticed it too as we walked in. "They really don't see the irony, do they?" she whispered. The private dining room was already buzzing when we arrived. I could hear my mother's voice from down the hall before we even reached the door. "And Brian's been working so hard. You wouldn't believe the offers he's getting. Real estate developers are just begging him for advice." We stepped inside, and I felt every eye turn toward us. The same cast of characters, uncles, cousins, old family friends. Brian stood near the center, one arm around Mom, his other hand holding a drink like he was the guest of honor. "Grant," he called out, smiling too wide. "Glad you could make it, big bro." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, shaking his hand. He leaned in slightly, his voice low. "Hope there's no hard feelings about the paperwork mess. All sorted now." I raised an eyebrow. "Sorted?" He grinned. "Yeah, let's just say I know how to handle things when I need to. You'd be surprised what a few phone calls can fix." I didn't ask what he meant, but I would find out soon enough. Dinner went as expected. Mom made a toast about family unity. Dad sat quietly, nodding along, avoiding eye contact. Brian soaked in the praise, regaling everyone with stories about his house, his plans, his achievements. Julia sat next to me, expression neutral but tense. I could feel her hand resting lightly on my leg under the table, grounding me, reminding me to breathe. Halfway through the meal, Mom stood up, glass in hand. "Before dessert, Brian has something very special to share with all of you." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Brian stood, straightening his shirt. "Thanks, Mom. So, as some of you know, I've been getting involved with real estate investments lately. It's been a wild ride, but things are really taking off." He gestured toward a man sitting near the end of the table, a well-dressed guy in his 40s with slicked back hair and an expensive watch. "This is Mr. Adler, one of my new business partners. We've been working on expanding the Meadowbrook property portfolio. Big things ahead." The room murmured with approval. I froze. Meadowbrook property portfolio. My pulse spiked. Mr. Adler smiled politely. "Brian's been a pleasure to work with. The property's under his management now, and once the final transfer clears, we'll be setting up a full investment trust." Julia turned to me, whispering, "Final transfer?" I forced a calm expression. "Excuse me," I said quietly, standing up. "Need to step outside for a moment." In the hallway, I took out my phone and opened my company email. There it was, a new notification from the county clerk's office. Transfer of ownership in review. Attached was a scanned form. My stomach twisted as I opened it. Another forged document. My signature again, sloppier this time, but enough to raise suspicion. He'd done it again. And this time, he'd brought someone else into it, a stranger who believed the lie. For a moment, I just stood there, phone in hand, trying to process it. 50 years of being dismissed, humiliated, ignored, and now this. The final insult. Julia followed me out a minute later. "Grant." I looked at her, my voice low but steady. "He's trying to sell it. My property. To someone else." Her eyes widened. He can't. He can't legally," I said, cutting her off, but that's never stopped him before. I walked back into the room just as Brian was finishing another story about his growing empire. The laughter felt louder now, the clinking glasses sharper, the air thicker. I sat back down slowly, watching him bask in attention like a performer unaware the curtain was about to drop. "Everything okay?" Mom asked sweetly. "Perfect," I said, forcing a smile. When dessert came, the waiter brought out a cake. White frosting, gold candles, the words "To New Beginnings" written across the top. The same waiter from my birthday, I realized. The same table, the same crowd, the same smug grin on my brother's face. But this time, something in me broke. It wasn't an explosion, no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet breaking, the kind you feel in your bones. I didn't even finish dessert. I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and said simply, "Congratulations, Brian." He looked at me, confused. "Leaving already?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Enjoy your night." Julia followed without a word. The car ride home was silent except for the sound of rain tapping the windshield. When we got inside, I went straight to my office. Julia lingered by the doorway. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" I didn't answer right away. I opened my laptop, pulled up the ownership documents again, and this time, I started a new file, a timeline. Every forged signature, every false claim, every lie. I organized everything meticulously. Finally, I looked up at her. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not." For the next few days, I avoided calls from my parents. When Mom finally showed up at my house unannounced, she was furious. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family?" she demanded. "Brian's saying you're trying to sabotage him out of jealousy. He's heartbroken, Grant. Heartbroken that his own brother would turn against him." I almost laughed. "Heartbroken? He forged my signature twice and tried to sell my property." She folded her arms tightly. "He said it was a misunderstanding. You always twist things." I stepped closer, my voice calm but sharp. "You've spent your entire life making excuses for him. But not this time. This time, he crossed a line even you can't cover for." She glared at me, her voice trembling. "You're going to regret this." I looked her in the eye. "No, Mom. He's the one who will." When she left, slamming the door behind her, I stood there in silence. The house felt bigger, emptier. Julia came up behind me, sliding her hand into mine. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded slowly. "I'm done being the quiet one." That night, I drafted one final email, not to Brian, not to my mother, but to someone else entirely. Someone who could make sure the truth came out clean, publicly, and legally. Because Brian hadn't just betrayed me. He'd taught me exactly how much I'd been underestimating myself. And while I might have been at my lowest, disowned, dismissed, and betrayed, I knew one thing for certain. Rock bottom is the perfect foundation to rebuild on. Only this time, I wasn't rebuilding quietly. The morning after Mom's outburst, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because things were resolved, far from it, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to win their approval anymore. The leash had snapped. No more guilt, no more quiet tolerance, no more pretending that keeping the peace was noble. I'd spent 50 years letting them write my story. Now, I was taking the pen back. I started the day like any other, coffee, a quiet breakfast with Julia, then a walk through the neighborhood, but everything felt different. Colors looked sharper, air felt cleaner, and even the silence wasn't heavy anymore. I wasn't the invisible one in the background of my brother's spotlight. I was the storm that had been forming behind it. At work, my focus sharpened. I'd built my company from the ground up, managing property development projects across 3 states. For years, I'd kept things modest, reinvesting profits, avoiding unnecessary attention. But now, I decided to expand. I met with my CFO, went through numbers, and by noon, I'd greenlit 2 new investment projects. For once, it wasn't just business, it was personal. Boss, my CFO, Martin, said with a grin as he looked over the projections, "You realize this'll double our valuation by the end of the year, right?" I smiled faintly. "Let's make it triple." As I drove home that evening, I passed through the Meadowbrook neighborhood, the one where Brian was still pretending to be king. The lights in his house were on, laughter spilling out through the windows. I parked at the curb for a minute, just watching. He had no idea that his world was balancing on a thread I controlled. And that thread was fraying fast. Julia joined me later that night in the living room. She sat cross-legged on the couch, sipping wine. "So, what's next?" she asked. I leaned back, a slow smile forming. "Next, we make things official." I'd already gathered every piece of evidence. The forged signatures, the fraudulent transfer attempts, the bank records, even screenshots of his social media posts falsely claiming ownership. It was all neatly organized in a single file, labeled Caldwell Holdings case. But before I used it, I wanted to build something bigger, something undeniable. Over the next few weeks, I started expanding my reach in the real estate scene. I attended investor meetings, reconnected with old clients, and quietly acquired 3 more properties under my company's umbrella. When people asked about my sudden momentum, I just smiled and said, "It's been a long time coming." The irony wasn't lost on me. While Brian was flaunting a house he didn't own, I was buying more without bragging once. A few weeks later, I received a call from a journalist I knew, an old acquaintance named Renee. We'd crossed paths years ago when she'd covered a community development project I led. She'd since moved on to larger stories, mostly about business and local finance scandals. "Grant," she greeted warmly. "It's been forever. What's got you reaching out now?" "Let's just say there's a story you'll want to hear," I said calmly. "About property fraud, family manipulation, and a man pretending to be something he's not." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "This sounds personal." "It is," I admitted. "But it's also verifiable. And I have proof." Over the next hour, I walked her through the story, omitting a few emotional details but providing all the facts. The forged documents, the false claims, the involvement of a potential investor, all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before saying, "Grant, if half of this checks out, it's going to be a hell of a headline." "Just make sure it's accurate," I said. "I don't want drama. I want truth." "Truth sells," she said with a small laugh. "Leave it with me." That same week, things started shifting subtly around me. Calls from old friends I hadn't heard from in years started trickling in. Former clients reached out with new projects. Even a local bank offered to partner on a redevelopment loan. It was like the universe had been waiting for me to stop dimming my light for everyone else's comfort. Julia noticed it too. "You're different lately," she said one night as we had dinner on the patio. "How so?" "You carry yourself differently," she said. "Less like you're waiting for something to happen, more like you've already decided what will." I smiled. Maybe I finally did. Then, almost poetically, Brian called. His name flashed across my phone screen one afternoon while I was in a meeting. I ignored it. He called again 2 minutes later. And again. Finally, I stepped out and answered. "Grant, what is this about?" he snapped the second I picked up. "Good afternoon to you too," I said evenly. "The bank's freezing the house account. They're saying there's an ownership dispute." "What did you do?" "What did I do?" I asked calmly. "Brian, I didn't do anything. You forged my name, remember? Actions have consequences." He was silent for a second, then lowered his voice. "You're really going to do this to me? To family?" I let out a dry laugh. "Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't steal." "You're pathetic," he hissed. "You've always been jealous. You finally got your revenge, huh? Happy now?" "Not yet," I said softly and hung up. That same night, the article went live. Headline: Local investor faces fraud allegations after forged property transfer surface. Source confirms ownership dispute under investigation. It didn't name him directly, but anyone in our circle knew exactly who it was about. The article cited documents obtained from county records and internal sources close to the property owner. Renee had done her job perfectly. Within 24 hours, the call started. "Mom first. How could you?" she cried. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to your brother?" "Maybe he should have thought about that before committing fraud," I said quietly. "Then Dad." His voice was tired, worn. "You didn't have to take it this far, son." I sighed. "No, Dad." He did. And then Brian again, this time from a blocked number. His voice was shaky now, not the smug confidence I was used to. "Grant, listen. I can fix this. Just call off whoever's leaking this crap, and we'll work it out." I almost felt pity. Almost. "Brian," I said, "you can't fix something you built on a lie." He swore under his breath, then hung up. Meanwhile, I was busier than ever. My company's name was suddenly in conversations that had never included me before. Other developers reached out, wanting to collaborate. Investors who'd once ignored my proposals now wanted meetings. It was like shedding the dead weight of my family's judgment had cleared a path forward. I spent more time at work, more time with people who actually respected me. Even Julia said she barely recognized me anymore, in a good way. "You look lighter," she said one night, curling up next to me on the couch. "Like you finally see your own worth." I smiled. Took me 50 years, but yeah, I do. The Meadowbrook situation was still unfolding. The bank had officially frozen the property account pending legal clarification, and the county registrar had opened an investigation into the fraudulent documents. I didn't have to do anything now. The truth was working for me. Then came the call that sealed everything. A real estate firm, ironically, the same one Brian had tried to impress with his investment empire, reached out to me directly. "Mr. Caldwell," the director said over the phone, "we've reviewed your portfolio and would like to discuss a partnership. Your recent projects are remarkable." It was validation, but more than that, it was power. The kind of power I'd spent a lifetime earning quietly while my family dismissed me as the serious one. Julia smiled when I told her. "You know what's funny?" she said. "They spent years calling you boring, and now everyone wants to be in business with you." Funny, I agreed. How truth has a way of catching up. By the time the next family gathering rolled around, a small Sunday brunch at Mom's insistence, the atmosphere had changed. When we walked in, conversations quieted. People looked at me differently. Not with pity, not with disinterest, but with a kind of uneasy respect. Brian was there, too. Pale, quieter than usual. His eyes met mine for a split second, then darted away. Mom fussed over him, pretending everything was fine. But even she couldn't fill the silence that followed when Dad muttered under his breath, "Sometimes the truth hurts." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just sat back and let the silence speak for itself. Because this wasn't revenge yet. Not fully. This was just the rise before the fall. And I was done being the quiet one who watched things happen. From now on, I'd be the one making them happen. The calm before the storm lasted exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks of silence from Brian. 2 weeks of strained phone calls from Mom asking if we could all just move past this. And 2 weeks of me pretending to be unbothered while, behind the scenes, I was preparing for the kind of closure that would finally rewrite 50 years of imbalance. The article had bruised his reputation, but it hadn't finished him. I knew my brother too well. He'd double down before he'd ever admit defeat. And sure enough, I started hearing whispers from mutual acquaintances. He was telling people that the article was fake news, that I'd sabotaged him out of jealousy. Some even believed him. I could have let it go, let the legal process handle everything, but that wasn't enough anymore. I didn't want just justice. I wanted clarity. I wanted every single person who'd ever looked at me like I was second best to see exactly who had been holding the cards all along. Then fate handed me the perfect opportunity. Mom called one evening while I was reviewing blueprints. "Sweetheart, Brian's having a little housewarming redo. You know, to remind people that everything's fine. He's inviting everyone, friends, family, clients, even that investor man who was so kind during the whole misunderstanding." I could almost hear her rehearsed innocence through the phone. "You should come," she added quickly. "Show support. It would mean a lot to your father and me." I leaned back in my chair. "Sure, Mom. I'll be there." Julia raised an eyebrow when I hung up. "You're going?" "Absolutely," I said with a calm smile. "I think it's time to make things official." Over the next few days, I quietly worked behind the scenes. I contacted my attorney, had the property records certified and notarized. I even reached out to Renee, the journalist, and asked her to hold off on publishing a follow-up until I said so. There was going to be a moment, one perfect, undeniable moment, where truth would take center stage and no one could spin it anymore. The day of the party arrived warm and cloudless, the kind of weather that almost mocks you with its peace. Julia and I pulled up to the Meadowbrook house just before sunset. Cars lined both sides of the street, luxury models, SUVs, familiar license plates from old family friends. Music thumped faintly through the windows. The whole neighborhood glowed in the amber light, and I couldn't help but think how poetic it was that the house itself, my house, would soon become the stage for its owner's undoing. When we stepped inside, it was déjà vu all over again. Laughter, champagne, the smell of catered food, and Brian in the middle of it all, grinning like a man who'd never known consequence. He spotted me instantly. "Well, look who decided to join the party," he said, approaching with open arms and a half-drunk glass of wine. "Guess you couldn't resist checking out the place again, huh?" "Something like that," I said. Julia's hand tightened around mine, a silent reminder to stay calm. Mom appeared from the kitchen, face lighting up in a way that was almost convincing. "Grant, you came. Isn't this lovely? Brian's done such a beautiful job, hasn't he?" I smiled faintly. It really is something. Dinner came and went in a blur of small talk and fake laughter. I didn't eat much. My focus was on timing. After dessert, Brian clinked his glass again, the same gesture he'd used at my birthday dinner. "Everyone," he announced. "Before we wrap up, I just want to thank you all for believing in me, even through, well, the recent drama." He chuckled like it was all a funny misunderstanding. "You can't keep a good man down, right?" The guests laughed politely. My mother smiled adoringly. I waited until the noise settled before standing up. "Actually," I said evenly, "that's not entirely true." The room quieted instantly. Brian's smile faltered. "What's that supposed to mean?" I took a slow breath. "You said the recent drama was all just a misunderstanding. I think it's only fair that everyone here gets the full story, don't you?" His eyes flickered with panic for a split second before his confident mask slid back into place. "Grant, come on. Let's not make this awkward." "Oh, I insist," I said, reaching into my jacket and pulling out a neatly folded envelope. "You see, there's been some confusion about ownership of this house. And since everyone's already here, I figured it was the perfect time to clear it up." Julia handed me a small box from her purse. I opened it and pulled out a document, the original, notarized property deed. I held it up. "This," I said, "is the certified title for the Meadowbrook property. As you can see," I unfolded it slowly, letting the hush deepen. "The legal owner is listed right here." The room leaned in. I could feel every eye fixed on me. Brian took a step forward, his face pale. "Grant, what are you doing?" I looked at him calmly. "Just telling the truth." I handed the deed to Mr. Adler, the investor he'd bragged about working with. "Go ahead, take a look." Adler scanned it, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. Then he looked up at Brian, visibly uncomfortable. "This says, Caldwell Holdings owns the property. That's not your company." Whispers rippled through the room. Mom's smile faded. Dad stared at his drink. Brian stammered. That's outdated paperwork. We already transferred it." "No, you didn't," I cut in. "You forged my signature on transfer documents, twice. The county clerk confirmed it last week. The bank's already frozen the account, and the investigation's still open." Someone in the back gasped. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Brian's voice cracked. "You're lying." "Really?" I asked, stepping closer. "Then maybe you can explain why the signature on those documents matches the one you used on your high school report cards when you forged Dad's name. Same angle, same stroke. You never learned subtlety." His face went blank. I continued, voice steady but louder now. "You wanted to humiliate me at my own birthday dinner. You made me invisible for years. But you made one mistake. You built your empire on property you never owned. So when you bragged to everyone about buying this house," I gestured around, "you were bragging about my investment, my deed, my name." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Even Mom didn't speak. Her eyes darted between us, disbelief and fear mixing like oil and water. Finally, I stepped back. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to set the record straight. And now that everyone knows the truth, I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your evening." I turned slightly, then paused. "Oh, and Brian, You'll want to check your mail tomorrow. There's an eviction notice waiting for you. You have 10 days to vacate my property." Gasps erupted again, but I didn't look back. Julia slipped her hand into mine, and together we walked out through the stunned crowd. As the door closed behind us, I heard my mother's voice break the silence inside. "Brian, is that true?" He didn't answer. Outside, the air was cool and still. Julia exhaled slowly, her voice trembling between relief and disbelief. "You actually did it." I smiled faintly, watching the house glow behind us like a monument to every lie that had finally collapsed. "No," I said softly. "He did it to himself." The car ride home was quiet, peaceful. For once, there were no words left to say. And though the night had been loud with revelation and consequence, inside me, everything was finally quiet. The fallout came faster than I expected. By the next morning, my phone was buzzing nonstop: calls, texts, voicemails. Half of them were from my mother, the other half from people who'd been at the party. Julia glanced at me over breakfast, her coffee steaming between her hands. "You're not going to answer any of them, are you?" I shook my head. "Not yet," because I already knew what the messages would say. Anger, denial, damage control, all the stages of panic from a family that had built their world on pretending. The first real confirmation came mid-morning when Martin, my CFO, walked into my office holding a folder. "You're not going to believe this," he said, barely containing a grin. "The county finished processing the claim. The fraud investigation's officially closed. You're cleared, and your brother's name is on the incident report." I took the folder, flipping through the papers. Everything was there: the forgery evidence, the emails, the notary confirmations. Brian's signature, fake as ever, was now part of an official legal record. "So it's over," I said quietly. Martin nodded. "Over and documented. He's done." Later that afternoon, a knock came at my office door. Julia peeked her head in. "You might want to see this." She handed me her phone, and there it was, an article posted by Renee, the journalist. Headline: "Family businessman faces legal action for forged deeds. Sources confirm charges under review." This time, there were names. Real ones. Brian's included. The article was factual, unemotional, but devastating. It detailed how he'd falsified ownership transfers, attempted to defraud a bank, and misled an investor. And at the end, there was one line that hit harder than any accusation. When reached for comment, the legal property owner stated simply, "Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen." Renee had quoted me perfectly. By evening, my mother called again. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was sharp, brittle, and trembling all at once. "Grant, what have you done? He's ruined. The papers, the embarrassment. How could you do this to your own brother?" I stayed calm. "I didn't ruin him, Mom. He ruined himself. All I did was stop protecting him." "You could have handled this privately," she snapped. "You mean quietly?" I said. "Like every other time he lied or took something that wasn't his." "No, not this time." There was a long silence. Then, softly, "He's moving out. They sent an officer today. He's devastated." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. "He'll live." She sniffed sharply. "You're cruel." "No," I said, my voice even. "I'm finally fair." Then I hung up. 2 days later, I drove past Meadowbrook. The street was quiet except for a moving truck parked out front. Brian stood by the curb, arms crossed, face drawn tight with exhaustion and shame. For the first time in my life, he didn't look smug, just small. He noticed my car before I could drive past. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he walked over. "Here to gloat?" he asked bitterly. "No," I said. "Just to see if you needed anything." He laughed once, short and humorless. "Yeah, right." He shoved his hands into his pockets. "They all hate me now. Mom barely speaks to me. Adler's threatening to sue. My name's trash." "You did that to yourself," I said quietly. "But maybe it's time to start over." He looked at me, eyes bloodshot. "You always think you're better than me." "I never thought I was better," I said, meeting his gaze. "I just stopped pretending you were." He flinched. For a second, I thought he might say something back, but he didn't. He just turned and walked toward the house. When I drove off, I caught one last glimpse of him standing on the empty porch, the house behind him stripped of furniture, his reflection in the glass smaller than I'd ever seen it. The next week, life settled into something new. Peaceful. Quiet in the right ways. The calls stopped. The gossip faded. My business thrived more than ever. Investors who'd once ignored me now sought my advice. Even Dad reached out, not to apologize, but to talk. "You did what you had to do," he said simply one afternoon. I should have seen it coming. Julia and I spent more evenings on the porch after that. She'd bring 2 glasses of wine, sit beside me, and we'd watch the sunset dip over the trees. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked once. I thought about it. About the years of silence, the insults disguised as jokes, the birthdays turned into someone else's spotlight. "No," I said. "I regret waiting this long." One morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name scrawled on the front. Inside, a single note in Brian's handwriting. "You were right. I don't know who I am without being the favorite. Maybe that's my punishment. Take care of Mom and Dad. I'll figure myself out." No excuses. No apology. Just that. And for the first time, I actually believed him. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into a drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but closure. It was over. Truly over. A month later, I hosted a dinner of my own. Small, intimate, nothing extravagant. Just a few close friends, Julia, and my parents, who'd finally agreed to come. There were no speeches, no toasts, no grand announcements. Just good food, laughter, and quiet contentment. At one point, Mom looked across the table and said softly, "You seem happy, Grant." I smiled. "I am." She hesitated. "I never realized how much I overlooked you." I looked at her, not with resentment, but with the calm understanding that comes from being free of someone's approval. "You don't have to say anything," I said gently. "Just see it now." When the night ended, I stepped outside onto the patio, the air cool and still. Julia came up beside me, slipping her arm through mine. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" "Yeah," I said quietly, watching the lights flicker from the dining room window. "It finally does." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "You did what needed to be done." I nodded. Not for revenge. For peace. We stood there for a while in silence, the world finally still, the weight finally gone. And as I looked out over the horizon, I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes, the loudest revenge isn't anger or destruction. It's living well, without needing to prove anything anymore. Because the truth had done what I never could. It spoke for me. And this time, everyone listened. "You're the most disappointing one in this family." My sister said that to my face, with her finger practically pressed against my nose and a disgusted look like I had personally ruined her life. It wasn't the first insult she'd thrown my way, but something about that one stuck. It hit like a cold slap on a warm day. Shocking, embarrassing, and just loud enough for everyone to hear. My name's Aiden. I'm 26 now. Grew up in a suburb where the houses all looked the same, and the families pretended they did too. Our family of 5 always looked perfect from the outside. Mom's garden was pristine. Dad was the guy who mowed his lawn every Saturday morning like it was a sacred ritual. And my sister Lily? She was the golden child. The cheerleader with straight A's, dating the quarterback, doing charity work every other weekend. And then there was me. The disappointment. The quiet one. The kid who liked computers and fixed the Wi-Fi when it broke. The one who didn't like church, didn't like sports, didn't like pretending. We grew up in that tight little house on Maple Ridge, and every room echoed with comparisons. If I got a B+, Lily had already gotten an A. If I won a $500 coding contest, Lily had just gotten accepted to another prestigious leadership retreat. If I said I was tired, Lily had just run a fundraiser for kids with cancer. My parents didn't even pretend to hide the favoritism. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" was practically a household motto. I learned to live around it. I'd smile, nod, and walk back to my room. And when I shut the door behind me, I'd work. Quietly, obsessively, for hours. Building things. Learning. Solving problems. Coding in the dark while everyone else watched TV. By the time I was 22, I had 2 remote freelance jobs, a few small business clients, and a steadily growing savings account. My parents still thought I was just playing on the computer. I didn't bother correcting them. I let them believe I was lazy, irresponsible, directionless. Let them judge me from their little island of curated perfection. Because truthfully, I didn't care about proving anything anymore. Not to them. Not until they needed me. And eventually, they did. It started small. Lily needed a new laptop for college. I had a spare, one I'd custom built. I offered it without being asked. She thanked me, sort of. More like a passing, "Oh, cool. Thanks." No eye contact. No appreciation. Then came the time Mom's car battery died in the middle of winter. I drove 45 minutes to jumpstart it while Dad was at a golf tournament. They said I was so helpful. That was the only time I heard those words, and even then, it sounded like they were reading them off a script. And then came the money. It wasn't all at once. It was casual, like it didn't mean anything. "Aiden, can we borrow a few hundred for Lily's textbook fees? We'll pay you back next month." "Aiden, your father and I are a little short on the mortgage this month. Do you mind?" At first, I gave without question. I figured, hey, I can afford it. It's family. That's what we do, right? Help each other out. But the paybacks never came, and the asks got bigger. By 24, I had moved into a small but decent apartment, still in the same town. I liked having my own space, finally breathing without needing to justify my existence. I'd come home, make coffee, work until 3 a.m. on projects that paid well and taught me more than any class ever could. I was quiet, independent, and apparently invisible until they needed something. They called me humble to their friends when it suited them. Aiden's the techie one, doesn't like attention, just likes helping out. But at home, I was still the scapegoat. Still the one who wasn't a team player, who never showed up enough, who only thought about himself. It all boiled over last Christmas. Lily had just graduated law school, and the whole family threw her a party. Not just any party, a full-blown event with catered food, custom decorations, and 30 guests packed into the house. I got a group text invite 2 days before. No direct message. No "Hey, we'd love to have you." Just a time and place. I showed up anyway, with a decent gift. One of those leather briefcases professionals always carry. It cost me more than I'd like to admit, but I figured maybe this time they'd see I cared. The moment I walked in, Lily barely glanced at me. Everyone else was gushing over her. "Lily, you're amazing. Lily, you're going to change the world. Lily, Harvard's next, right?" I stayed by the food table for most of the evening, sipping punch and dodging conversations. Then came the moment that changed everything. We were all gathered around the living room, and Dad raised a toast. To Lily, the pride of this family. I clapped like everyone else. Nothing new. But then someone, I think it was our cousin Jason, asked if Lily was going to pay off her student loans with her fancy new job. She laughed and said, "Hopefully I won't have to. You know, with Aiden playing sugar daddy these days." People chuckled. Even my parents smiled like it was a cute joke. I just stared at her. She looked me dead in the eyes and smirked. And that's when I asked, quietly, "How much have I paid for you, Lily?" The room went quiet. "What?" she asked, feigning innocence. "How much? Just a ballpark." I sipped my punch again. "Oh my God, Aiden, are you seriously doing this now?" Her voice rose. "I just want to know, since it's such a joke. Tuition, laptop, textbooks, bar prep course. I have the receipts. It's close to $28,000, right?" My mom gasped. My dad cleared his throat. Lily flushed red. "You're being dramatic," she said. "We're family. It's not like we were taking advantage." I nodded slowly. "Right. Of course." Then she pointed at me, and I swear the room went ice cold. "You know what your problem is? You think money makes you important, but it doesn't. You're the most disappointing one in this family, Aiden. Always have been. Always will be." She said it so matter-of-factly, like it wasn't up for debate. I didn't say anything, didn't make a scene, didn't cry or argue. I just nodded, set my drink down, and walked out. No one followed me. I went home, packed my bags, and left town the next morning. No calls, no messages. I didn't block anyone, just stopped replying. I got an Airbnb in a small mountain town and kept working remotely. Peaceful, quiet. For the first time in years, I slept without clenching my jaw. Then, 3 weeks later, I got a call from my dad. He sounded panicked. "Aiden, why isn't the loan paid? The one for Lily's car." I paused, staring out the window. I smiled just a little, and I said, "Your disappointment isn't your sponsor anymore." I stared at my phone for a long time after I hung up on Dad. The silence felt louder than anything he'd said. My heart wasn't pounding. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I felt empty, numb, like something that had been hanging on by threads inside of me had finally snapped loose, floated away, and left nothing in its place. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It hadn't been for a while. It was the years of swallowing disrespect, of being useful but not valued. Needed, but never appreciated. Present, but somehow always invisible. I didn't answer any of their follow-up calls. Not when Dad called again 10 minutes later. Not when Mom texted, "Can we just talk?" Not when Lily sent a single word, "Seriously?" I turned off my phone for 3 days. I sat in that little rental cabin and watched the snow fall through the windows. And for the first time in years, I breathed without feeling like I owed anyone anything. When I finally turned the phone back on, the voicemails flooded in. Dad's tone went from demanding to pleading, back to angry. Mom's messages were wrapped in guilt. "We didn't mean it that way. You know we love you. Don't overreact." Lily didn't even pretend to apologize. One message just said, "You embarrassed the whole family walking out like that. Grow up." That was it for me. I wasn't coming back. Weeks passed. I stayed gone. I got another gig, building a custom backend for a startup in Austin, and the check hit my account 2 days before my birthday. I splurged on a new espresso machine and cooked myself a steak. No one called. No one said happy birthday. I didn't expect them to, but it still stung. Even after everything. I think the turning point wasn't when Lily called me a disappointment. It was when they all heard it and said nothing. That silence. That was worse. And yet, somehow, things kept escalating. Mid-February, I got a notice from the bank. An account I'd co-signed with my dad when I was 21, a dumb favor I did without asking questions, had been drawn on again. He was using it. A lot. For what? I had no idea. But I sure knew who'd be liable if it defaulted. I called the bank, froze the account, and started the process to get my name off it. And I finally blocked Dad's number. Not out of spite. Just self-preservation. But that was the moment they snapped. The emails started arriving. First from Mom. Then from Lily. Then from my aunt, of all people. Mom wrote, "You're making things harder than they need to be. This is your father. He's done so much for you. Can't you put your pride aside for once?" Lily's was worse. "Hope you feel good screwing over your own family. Dad might lose the house. Guess you really are as cold as we all thought." And Aunt Michelle, who I hadn't spoken to in 3 years, "Aiden, honey, your mom is worried sick. Can you please come home and fix this? Be the bigger person." The bigger person. That's what they always wanted from me. The one who doesn't talk back. The one who quietly steps in, cleans up the mess, and vanishes again. I didn't reply to any of them. But I did something else. I logged into my bookkeeping software and started pulling receipts. Every transfer. Every loan. Every tuition payment. Every gas tank filled when they forgot their wallets. I compiled it all. Organized it. Added interest. The total was just shy of $42,000. I didn't plan on collecting. I wasn't going to sue them or demand the money. That wasn't the point. The point was to stop letting them pretend it didn't happen. I sent the PDF in a group email. No message. Just the file. I titled it disappointment_invoice.pdf. Lily replied in 5 minutes. "Are you out of your mind?" I didn't answer. Mom called. I let it ring. Dad showed up at my door. That I didn't expect. I heard the knock at noon on a Sunday. Peeked through the window. There he was, standing in his Sunday jacket, hair neatly combed, eyes already looking tired. I opened the door halfway. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He took off his cap, held it in his hands like he was at a funeral. "I need to talk," he said. "Please." I let him in. Not out of kindness. More like curiosity. I needed to see it for myself. What this man, who had ignored my birthdays, downplayed my work, and let his daughter humiliate me in front of our entire family, would say now. He didn't sit. Just stood awkwardly by the window. "Your mother and I were worried." About me? No. About this family falling apart. I almost laughed. "It's been falling apart for years, Dad. You just never noticed because it wasn't your side cracking." He winced. "Look, I know we've made mistakes." "Stop," I said, sharper than I intended. "Don't make this about we. You're not here to apologize. You're here because I stopped paying your bills." That hit him. Harder than I thought it would. He looked down at the floor, then back at me, and said something I'll never forget. "Lily's in trouble." I raised an eyebrow. "Define trouble." "She used your name. For another loan." The room went silent. My heart dropped, and I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one. "Excuse me," I said quietly. She said it was a short-term thing. A bridge loan. She thought you wouldn't mind. She used your name and credit history through that cosign account. The bank didn't flag it until they tried to contact you and couldn't reach her." I sat down slowly. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Dad kept going. It was supposed to be a down payment on a place with her fiancé. But now he backed out. And she defaulted. The debt's in collections, and your name's still attached. I didn't even feel anger. I felt heat. Cold, acidic heat in my stomach, crawling up my spine. She committed fraud, I said flatly. She's your sister. Exactly. He stepped forward. She didn't mean harm. She stole my identity, Dad. I know. We didn't know where else to turn. That's when I saw it. The truth. He wasn't here because he was sorry. He was here because the walls were closing in. And the only person who'd ever saved them before, the disappointment, had finally walked away. And they were drowning without me. I stood up. You need to leave. Aiden. Now. He looked like he might cry. Like he'd been practicing this speech in the car the whole way over, and none of it worked the way he wanted. But I didn't budge. And eventually, he nodded, put his cap back on, and walked out the door. I locked it behind him. Then I sat back down, opened my laptop, and looked up legal counsel. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was war. And the worst part? It was just getting started. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there at the kitchen table, the screen glow painting shadows across the walls as I reread the bank notifications, legal disclaimers, and loan documentation Lily had signed, using my name. My credit, my reputation. Also, she could lock in a condo with her fiancé. A fiancé who'd apparently bailed the second the down payment cleared. She hadn't even bothered to tell me. She hadn't called, hadn't messaged, hadn't apologized. The only reason I knew was because the walls finally got too tall for her to climb, and Dad had come knocking like I was the family's emergency fire escape. The account balance read negative. The debt? $67,300, including penalties. It had been accumulating interest for weeks. That bridge loan Lily took out? She never intended to pay it back. I'd been robbed. Not by a stranger in the night. Not by some scammer on the internet. By my own sister. The golden girl. The one with the halo so bright, Mom and Dad couldn't see the smoke curling behind her. The one I'd given laptops to, paid tuition for, defended when people said she was manipulative or fake. I remembered every single late-night call where she cried over a breakup or a bad exam, or how no one understood how much pressure she was under. I had listened. I had supported her. I had carried her weight on my back for years. And now she'd forged my signature and dumped 67 grand on my shoulders like I was her personal vault. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel. Not yet. But I moved. Methodically. I sent emails. I printed documents. I locked my credit. Filed the fraud report. Contacted a lawyer. It took me 4 days to put everything in motion. 4 days of silent, tight-lipped focus. I drank cold coffee. Ate nothing but toast. I didn't turn on music. I didn't answer any calls. My mind tunneled inward like I was digging out of a collapsed mine shaft. On the 5th day, it hit me. I sat in the shower at 2 a.m., fully clothed, just letting the water run, and the pressure finally cracked something open. My chest hurt. My jaw was sore from clenching. My vision blurred and cleared in waves. I was angry. Not the explosive kind, the quiet, corrosive kind that eats your ribs from the inside. Not just at Lily. At all of them. For never seeing me. For treating my generosity like a bank withdrawal with no receipt. For inviting me to every crisis, but never to the celebrations. For building me into a family myth, the disappointment with a debit card. That was the fall. And as much as it hurt, it was also clarifying. It was the first time I didn't doubt whether I deserved better. I knew I did. After that, something in me shifted. I went quiet, but in a different way than before. Not invisible, not withdrawn, just focused, controlled. Like the volume in my head finally turned down enough for me to think clearly. I didn't call anyone. Not my parents. Not Lily. Not my aunt or cousins. I ghosted the family WhatsApp group without a word. I even muted my own birthday reminders. I didn't need more, sorry I missed it, messages 6 days late. Instead, I worked. But this time, it wasn't just about paying bills. I'd always been the freelancer, the behind-the-scenes fixer, the guy people paid to clean up their code or redesign their broken systems. I made good money, but I never built anything for myself. I never had time. Family always came first. Their crises always filled the calendar. Not anymore. I spent 2 months doing nothing but writing. I had this idea for a SaaS tool that automated workflow integrations for mid-sized businesses. Boring to some, but I knew the demand was there. I'd seen it firsthand while helping clients duct tape 5 platforms together just to get one clean analytics dashboard. So I built it from scratch. Wrote the backend in Python, built a sleek front end in React, tested it in beta with 2 old clients I trusted, and slowly, carefully, polished it until it actually worked. I named it Thread, because that's what I was doing, pulling a thread through everything they'd tangled around me, and stitching something new out of it. By the 3rd month, I had 10 companies using it. By month 5, I had a waiting list. Revenue didn't explode overnight, but it was steady, predictable, mine. And for the first time, I wasn't just trading hours for money. I was building equity. I was building value. And I didn't tell anyone. Not a soul. I didn't post about it on social. Didn't bring it up in conversations with old friends. I wasn't doing it to prove anything. I was doing it because it felt good, clean, quietly powerful. In the background, the legal stuff dragged on. The fraud report triggered an investigation. The bank sided with me, but the collections agency was slower to back off. My lawyer filed a formal notice against Lily. She didn't respond. Then she did. A text. Just 3 words. You ruined me. I stared at it for a long time. The audacity. I didn't reply. I screenshotted it, sent it to my lawyer, and blocked the number. I heard through a mutual friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year, that Lily's engagement officially collapsed after the fraud went public. Her ex-fiancé's family threatened legal action. She lost her job at the law firm before her trial period ended. Something about ethics violations. She moved back in with my parents. They didn't tell me. Of course they didn't. But I saw them watching my Instagram stories one night. My mom, my dad, even Lily's old account, which I hadn't blocked yet. I wasn't posting anything flashy, just coffee, sunsets, code snippets. But I could feel the shift. They knew I was doing fine, better than fine, and they hated that they didn't know how. Around this time, I moved. Found a loft an hour north, overlooking a small river, with tall ceilings and brutalist beams, and this strange sense of peace I'd never felt in the old house. I filled it with plants, got a new couch, installed a standing desk. I stopped ordering fast food and started cooking, badly at first, then surprisingly well. I started sleeping. Deep, uninterrupted sleep, like my nervous system had finally stopped flinching. And somewhere between the work, the solitude, and the silence, I started to heal. Not in the self-help book kind of way. Not with affirmations or vision boards. Just time, boundaries, space. I remembered who I was before the guilt, before the golden child comparisons, before the finger in my face. And I started to like that guy again. One night, I was sitting on the balcony watching the moonrise, laptop on my knees, debugging a weird issue in Thread's notification system. When it hit me, I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't counting how many people still owed me gratitude. I wasn't replaying Lily's words in my head like a scratched record. I was done with all of that. But that didn't mean I was done with them. Because as much as I'd rebuilt my life, my business, my self-worth, there was still one thing left hanging in the air. Accountability. They thought they'd gotten away with it. That the worst had already passed. That I'd disappear again like I always had. Quiet, tired, obliging. They hadn't seen who I'd become. And the moment to show them was coming. Soon. Very soon. But not yet. Revenge is a funny word. People think it's loud, flashing headlights, slammed doors, screaming confrontations in family kitchens. But real revenge, at least the kind that satisfies something deeper than ego, isn't loud at all. It's slow, surgical. It whispers, I see you, while it rearranges the walls of the maze until the rat realizes it's trapped. And by the time I reached month 7 in that new loft, with my business growing and my peace finally steady, I didn't want to scream anymore. I just wanted them to see clearly, everything. Not just what they did to me, but what I became without them, and what they lost because of it. That's where it started. The setup. It began with a wedding invitation. Not Lily's, of course. Hers had disintegrated months ago, buried under a collapsed engagement and a fraud report. No, this was my cousin Maddie, Mom's niece. The nice one. The only person in our extended family who had ever treated me like I wasn't effective. She was getting married that August. Outdoor ceremony, big venue, all the family invited, including, apparently, me. Maddie's email was short but warm. Aiden, I hope this reaches you. I know things have been messy, and I won't pretend to understand everything, but I'd love to have you there if you're open to it. No pressure. Just family. For real this time. I stared at that message for a while. At first, I almost declined. I hadn't seen these people in nearly a year. What was the point? But then I thought about that word again, revenge. And I realized, this wasn't just a wedding. It was a stage. A captive audience. A pressure cooker of unspoken drama simmering under a white tint and mason jar centerpieces. And suddenly, it was perfect. But I wouldn't just show up. I'd show up changed. Proven. And with a truth they couldn't dodge. I started by gathering receipts, digital and emotional. Remember that PDF I sent months ago? The disappointment underscore invoice. That was just the teaser. I had every Venmo transaction, every tuition payment, every bank transfer, every chat where I was just helping out. I organized them again, this time with commentary. Each section labeled, dated, and highlighted with red flags where Lily's signature had been forged or stretched into something legally damning. Then I contacted my lawyer. Not to sue. Not yet. But to prep something public. Not a scandal. Just exposure. Controlled. Elegant. He helped me draft a letter, neutral in tone, but razor-sharp in content. A formal notice outlining the fraud, the damages, the bank's decision to remove liability from my name, and Lily's refusal to engage in restitution. It read like a case file, not a tantrum. It even had a watermark. I printed 20 copies on thick cream paper. Next, I reached out to 2 old clients, business owners who owed me favors. I told them I was considering launching Thread 2.0 as a formal SaaS product at the end of summer and was looking for early partners and testimonials. Both said yes within a day. One of them offered to sponsor a booth at an upcoming tech networking event in late July. That gave me 3 weeks to prep branding, polish the UI, and print brochures. It also gave me a deadline, 1 week before the wedding. Just enough time to update my site, publish my growth numbers, and have something real to show for the ghost they thought I'd become. But the real setup? The personal one? That came with a single message I never expected to send. I reached out to Lily's ex. His name was Jordan. I didn't know him well. We'd met twice at holidays. But he seemed sharp, quiet, polite. And I remembered something he'd said once at a family dinner, back when they were still engaged. Lily always talks about how much she owes her brother. I didn't realize he basically funded her degree. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Now I realized it was a clue. So I messaged him. Simple. Direct. Hey Jordan, I know this is random. I wanted to ask if you'd be open to a call. It's about something that affected both of us. No drama. Just the truth. He replied in 5 minutes. We spoke that night. For 2 hours. Turns out, Lily had told him she had taken out the condo loan in her own name, but that her generous brother was helping co-sign to build trust. She'd convinced Jordan that I was in on it, that I was her financial sidekick. He was furious when he found out otherwise. He'd already been having doubts about her, the lies about small things, the stories that never added up. But when he saw my documents, screenshotted receipts, the loan applications, my bank's fraud report, he sat in silence for a solid minute. Then he just said, I should have seen it. I didn't ask him to do anything. But 2 days later, he emailed me a notarized affidavit stating he'd been misled by Lily and confirming that I had not, in any way, consented to the loan. It was like being handed a sword. Polished, sharp, and entirely legal. I added it to the folder. By the end of July, the Thread 2.0 launch went live. The site looked crisp. I had live demos running, early adopters giving testimonials, and my LinkedIn finally updated with a professional-looking banner and a confident bio. Within 48 hours, I had 2,000 views. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't post flashy screenshots. I just added a new tagline beneath my name. Founder Rebuilder, previously known as the Family Disappointment. It was subtle, but I knew they'd see it. Because right after I posted it, Mom viewed my profile. Then Lily. Then, 2 days later, even Aunt Michelle. No one messaged me. But that's when the texts started rolling in, from cousins, old family friends, even a neighbor from my childhood street. Dude, this looks amazing. Congrats on the new business, man. Looks like you've been killing it. Just saw your launch. I knew you were quiet for a reason. Every single one was fuel. And I kept quiet. Kept posting. Until the wedding. The drive down felt like the beginning of a heist. I had the documents packed neatly in a folder in my glove box. My outfit was tailored but subtle. Nothing flashy, just clean lines and quiet wealth. The venue was a rustic vineyard, all twinkle lights and linen napkins. I parked at the far end of the gravel lot and took a deep breath before walking in. First eyes on me, Aunt Michelle. Her face twitched when she saw me, somewhere between forced warmth and anxiety. She gave me a hug that felt like shaking hands with a statue. "You look different," she said. "I am," I replied. Maddie was glowing. She pulled me into a real hug and whispered, "I'm so glad you came." Seriously. I smiled and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a personal check, signed, no note. She opened it hours later and cried. I know, because she texted me the next day. "No one's ever believed in me like that. Thank you." But that night, the show was just beginning. I wasn't seated at the main family table, of course, but close enough. I could see Lily, her hair curled tight, her dress a little too showy for a wedding she wasn't starring in. Her expression? Tight, like she was holding her breath every time someone new walked in, terrified they might have heard something. She saw me about halfway through the reception. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't wave. I didn't either. I waited until after dinner. People were milling around. Toasts had been made. The music had started. I picked my moment carefully, just enough wine flowing for lips to loosen, but not enough for memories to blur. I walked over to the family table, smiled at Mom, nodded at Dad, looked Lily dead in the eyes. "Hey," I said casually. "Quick thing. I brought a few things I thought you might want to see." She stiffened. "What?" "Don't worry. It's not public. Yet." Then I slid the envelope onto the table. Cream paper, neatly sealed. No dramatics. Dad reached for it. Lily snatched it first. She opened it. Read the title page. Then froze. I leaned closer, quiet enough that only our table could hear. "That's the total amount of money I contributed to your education, career, and lifestyle over the past 10 years, along with the fraudulent loan and a notarized statement from Jordan confirming he was misled." Her mouth opened slightly. She looked at Dad, then Mom, both pale. I smiled. "Don't worry. I'm not suing. Yet." And then, still calm, still quiet, I said, "But if I ever hear my name brought up again, if I get one more email, one more whisper, one more guilt trip, this packet goes to every single contact in this room, and the bar association, and your former employer, and your future ones." She tried to speak. I raised one hand. "Not here. Not tonight. Maddie deserves better. But after this wedding, we are done." Then I turned and walked away. Not to the car, but to the dance floor, where I smiled, for the first time in a year, for real. Because the trap was set. And the fall? The one they thought I'd never recover from? It was just the launch pad. But the final act? That was still coming. The silence that followed the wedding was louder than any fight we'd ever had. No messages. No emails. No blocked calls from Mom begging for just a minute. No texts from Dad trying to clear the air. Not even one of those passive-aggressive chain-forwarded Bible quotes from Aunt Michelle. It was like someone had finally unplugged the family machine, and all that noise I'd lived under for years just stopped. It was the first time in my life they didn't try to guilt me back, which told me one thing: they were scared. And they should have been, because I hadn't even started yet. The wedding was never meant to be the revenge. That was just the warning shot. A dress rehearsal. One final chance for them to do the unthinkable, apologize. But they didn't. Not after the envelope. Not after seeing Jordan's affidavit, or the receipts, or the line item for the fraud Lily committed in plain daylight. No calls. No apologies. No ownership. Just silence. And if there's one thing I learned about people like my family, it's this: they only stay quiet when they're plotting. So I watched. I waited. I didn't need to poke the bear. I already knew it was coming. A few weeks later, it did. An email. From a generic HR@greenstonelegal.com. I clicked it open, heart steady, eyes already braced for it. It was a reference request. For Lily. Apparently, she'd applied to an in-house counsel position at a mid-sized firm 2 states over. They were doing their due diligence. She'd listed me as her freelance client from 2020 to 2021. That was bold. Lie 1. I had never hired her. Lie 2. We hadn't spoken professionally in years. Lie 3. She stole from me. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I picked up the phone and called their HR department directly. "Hi, this is Aiden Miles. I'm following up on a reference request you sent me regarding Lily Miles. I want to make sure you have the full context before proceeding." The woman on the other end was polite but cautious. "Yes, of course. We always appreciate clarification. I'm afraid I can't recommend her." Not only was she never contracted by my company, but she also used my identity to secure a fraudulent loan of over $60,000. Legal documentation confirming this, including a bank fraud report and a notarized statement from a third party, can be sent upon request. There was a pause. Then the HR rep asked, "Would you mind emailing that to us?" I did. Within 5 minutes. Lily didn't get the job. I found out through the same mutual friend who'd told me about her fiancé leaving. Apparently, she'd made it to the final round before they pulled her application with zero explanation. She cried for 2 days. My parents blamed cancel culture. I didn't respond. I just archived the email chain in a folder called Clean Cuts. But that was just part 1. Part 2 started when Thread hit 500 active users. By now, the tool had a proper marketing funnel. Clean UX. A wait list growing by the day. I'd hired 2 part-time devs and a virtual assistant. One of my old college friends, Mason, came on as my operations partner. We'd done projects together back in school, and he was the kind of guy who loved structure the way I loved building. Mason knew my story, every gritty detail. And when I told him I had one more thing to do, one final card to play, he didn't blink. "Just make sure they see it," he said. "Otherwise, it's just justice, not revenge." So I did. I launched the statement. It was a blog post. Clean. Simple. Titled, "The Cost of Being the Family Disappointment." I didn't name anyone. I didn't call out specifics. But I told the story exactly as it happened. The golden child. The stolen identity. The quiet rebuild. The rise. The moment I walked away. It was part memoir, part business case study. I framed it as a founder's journey. How betrayal taught me boundaries. How distance taught me discipline. How pain taught me purpose. And I ended it with a line I had written months earlier on a napkin in that mountain cabin while watching the snow fall. Sometimes, the best thing your family can give you is a reason to become unrecognizable. It blew up. I woke up to 12,000 views. Then 50,000. Then it got reposted on a startup founder forum and shared on LinkedIn by 2 angel investors. A week later, a VC emailed me. He didn't ask about the story, just said, "Thread looks interesting. Let's talk." By the end of the quarter, I had a seed offer on the table. Low 7 figures. I didn't take it yet, but I printed the offer sheet and tucked it inside the same folder as the old fraud documents. Just in case. That was when the real fallout began. Mom broke first. She called one Sunday morning, around 10 a.m., like nothing had happened. No acknowledgement of the post. No mention of Lily. Just, "Hi honey, how have you been?" I let her talk for 5 minutes. About how the garden was doing. About how Dad's cholesterol was finally coming down. About how she'd seen one of your little articles floating around and thought, "Wow, maybe he's finally doing okay." I was silent the whole time. Then I asked, "Did you know?" She paused. "Know what?" That Lily used my name. That she put me in debt. That she cost me nearly 70 grand and tried to pretend it was a gift. A long silence. Then, she was scared. I laughed. So was I. She sighed. "Families make mistakes, Aiden. But we don't turn on each other. You turned on me years ago. You just didn't call it that." Then I hung up. Dad emailed next. A single line. "If this is your idea of revenge, congratulations." I replied with a link to the article. And nothing else. "Lily?" She finally broke her silence with a letter. Handwritten. Delivered to my office. The handwriting was tight, neat, almost lawyerly. Like she'd edited it a dozen times before committing to paper. She didn't apologize. Not really. She said she regretted the outcome. That she was struggling to rebuild. That she hoped one day we could sit down and talk like adults. She ended it with a line that felt like the last shred of control she had left. "At the end of the day, we're still blood." I didn't reply, but I did frame it. Put it on the wall across from my desk, right under a black and white print of my blog post headline. A reminder of what it cost and what it taught me. These days, Thread is profitable. We're not huge, maybe we never will be, but we're steady, solid, clean. I wake up excited to work. I go to sleep without checking my phone for drama. I see a therapist once a week, not because I'm broken, but because I never want to be blind again. Sometimes, Maddie texts me pictures of her baby. She calls me Uncle Aiden. I send her gift cards and bad dad jokes, and every once in a while, she'll say, "You should come visit." Maybe someday I will. But I like my space. I like my peace. I like who I became when I finally stopped asking for their permission to exist. And as for the family that called me a disappointment, they were right, but not in the way they thought. I disappointed every expectation they had, and it saved my life. I was 29 when it happened, but the seed of this story was planted way before that, probably somewhere around my 20th birthday, when I first started noticing the small cracks in my family's foundation. My name's Tyler, and to most people who knew me growing up, I was the responsible one. The one who didn't cause trouble. The one who always showed up, paid his share, helped clean up after the barbecue, called on birthdays, and didn't ask for much. That was my role in the family, and I played it well. My sister, Melissa, on the other hand, she was the one who needed support. She was the one who had a rough time after college, the one who bounced from job to job, apartment to apartment, always with some new crisis clinging to her heels like static. But somehow, despite all that, or maybe because of it, she was also the one who seemed to get the lion's share of attention, sympathy, and, though I didn't know it at the time, something much bigger. Now, don't get me wrong. I didn't hate my sister. Melissa and I weren't close, but we weren't exactly estranged either. We texted on holidays, exchanged stiff hugs at family gatherings, and made small talk over mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving. It was a civil, if distant, relationship. I figured we were just two adults going in different directions. I had a stable job in software engineering, a condo an hour from my parents' place, and a life I'd built through long hours and sacrifice. Meanwhile, she was still living just 20 minutes away from them, dropping by their place almost daily, always needing something, whether it was money, help with rent, or just someone to listen to her latest drama with a boyfriend who didn't get her. Our parents, well, they never said it out loud, but they treated her like a fragile glass ornament and me like a sturdy old tool they could always rely on. And I accepted that, for a while, because that's what you do when you're the responsible one, right? You shrug it off. You keep being helpful. You pick up the tab at dinner when Melissa forgets her wallet. You quietly cover half of the utilities when mom and dad's heater breaks down. You nod and smile when they talk about how proud they are of Melissa for applying to a new job, even if it's the third time this year. You tell yourself they love you both equally. You tell yourself not to keep score. But the truth? I had been keeping score for a long time. I just never expected to find the ledger written down in black and white. It started with an innocent question. I was over at my parents' house one Sunday afternoon, fixing the kitchen sink, again. They always called me when something broke, because I knew how to handle these things, which meant I had watched a YouTube video once and owned a wrench. Melissa wasn't there that day, which was rare. She usually popped in around dinner. Mom was in the living room, flipping through a stack of mail, and Dad was half listening to the game on TV. We were making small talk when I asked something offhand. Hey, whatever happened with the refinancing stuff you mentioned last month? Mom blinked. Oh, that's all sorted. We added Melissa to the deed, so things are easier when we're older. I paused mid-tighten on the pipe. Wait, you put her name on the house. Just makes sense, she said with a shrug. She's always around. Helps out when we need her. And she's not as set as you are. You've got your own place, your own thing going. I didn't say anything right away. Just stared at the sink for a long second, the wrench suddenly feeling a lot heavier in my hand. My mind was spinning in this slow, disorienting way, like I'd been shoved underwater without warning. They put her name on the house. Without telling me, just handed over partial ownership of the home they had always claimed would go to both of you someday. Dad chimed in without looking away from the TV. Don't overthink it, Ty. It's just paperwork. Doesn't change anything. But it did. It changed everything. I finished fixing the sink in silence. When I stood up and wiped my hands on the towel, something in me felt different. Not angry, not yet. More like a switch had flipped. A light bulb turned on in a room I didn't know was dark. That night, I lay awake turning it over in my mind. All the things I'd done over the years. The bills I'd helped cover when Dad lost his part-time job and didn't tell Melissa. The groceries I had quietly ordered to their house during COVID. The countless times I'd driven over to fix, repair, replace, solve. And now this, Melissa, who never paid a dime toward the house, who lived like a boomerang, bouncing between apartments and jobs, was on the deed. Just like that. Because she was always around. That phrase echoed in my head like a mosquito buzz I couldn't swat. Always around. I guess being reliable gets you respect until someone decides presence matters more than contribution. I tried to let it go. Really, I did. I told myself I didn't want the house. I had my own. I told myself Melissa probably needed the security. I told myself it wasn't worth causing a scene over. But deep down, it wasn't about the house. It was about the fact that they didn't even think I deserved to be part of the conversation. That they made a decision, one that cut me out, and just expected I'd be okay with it. And for a few weeks, I pretended I was. Until the next time Mom called asking if I could cover their electric bill, because things were a little tight this month. That's when something in me shifted again. Slower this time. Colder. I said I'd think about it. And then I didn't send a cent. Not for the electric bill. Not for the water. Not for the emergency groceries when their card got declined at the store. For the first time in years, I let the silence stretch. A week later, Melissa texted me. Hey, Mom said you're being weird about helping. Is everything okay? I didn't reply. 2 weeks after that, Dad left me a voicemail. Just wanted to say we love you. And if you're upset about something, we should talk. I didn't call back. And then, a full month after I stopped paying their bills, it came. A text from Mom. Simple and direct. We need money for house repairs. Can you help? I stared at that message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. So many things I could say. So many ways I could finally let them know how it felt to be the afterthought. But in the end, I only sent one sentence. And the moment I hit send, I knew everything was about to change. My reply to Mom's message was 7 words long. Ask the one whose name is on it. That was it. No anger, no explanation, no emotional outburst. Just a single sentence loaded with everything I had kept buried for years. The years of being treated like a backup plan, while Melissa got to play the main character in a family story I'd clearly been miscast in. I stared at the message for a few minutes after I sent it, half expecting an immediate response. None came. Not that night, not the next morning. But silence has a way of making noise when people are used to your compliance. And within days, the cracks started to show. First came the passive-aggressive group text from Melissa. Not sure what's going on, but Mom and Dad really need help right now. I don't have the money. Wish I did. I'd step up if I could. It was a thinly veiled jab, one that might have guilt me 5 years ago. Not anymore. I didn't answer. 3 days later, Dad called. I let it ring. Then he tried again. Voicemail this time. Ty, look, your mother's upset. You know this house is important to all of us. Melissa's name being on it was just a formality. You'll still be taken care of, I promise. But we can't make these repairs without help. Taken care of. Like I was some child promised a slice of cake at the end of dinner. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. That was the moment I realized they didn't understand yet. They thought this was a phase, that I was sulking and just needed time to cool off. But they didn't know that something fundamental had changed. I wasn't being dramatic. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't hoping for a heart-to-heart where everyone finally saw things from my side. I was done. Done being the fallback. Done carrying responsibilities that weren't mine. Done watching my parents reward Melissa for being dependent while quietly draining me for being dependable. And right around the time they began to feel the weight of that absence, Melissa did something that ripped the last bit of sympathy I had for her clean out of me. I found out through a friend, not even through the family. My buddy Kevin, who's known me since high school and still lives a few blocks from my parents, texted me one evening out of the blue. Hey man, weird question. Did you sell your parents your old patio set? I blinked at my phone. What? He sent a photo. It was unmistakably my old outdoor furniture, black iron table, curved chairs, the glass top with the slight chip on the left corner. I'd stored it in my garage since moving into my condo because I didn't have a yard anymore. Nobody had touched it for months. But there it was, sitting in my parents' backyard. Kevin said Melissa told his girlfriend she'd scored it for free from her generous brother. That was news to me. I drove over the next day just to confirm. I didn't even go inside. Just parked across the street and stared at the backyard. Sure enough, there it was. My set up nicely on the freshly cleaned patio, with a potted plant I definitely hadn't left on the table. That night, I texted Melissa. Hey, when were you going to ask before taking my patio set? She replied 10 minutes later. Mom said it was fine. It was just sitting there. You weren't using it. No apology. No acknowledgement that she'd crossed a line. Just more entitlement disguised as casual explanation. I didn't answer. 2 days later, she texted again. You're being really petty about this stuff. We're family. It's just a table. Do you really need to make everything a problem? That's when I realized she genuinely believed this was all just furniture. A few bills. A name on a document. She didn't see the years of imbalance, the slow bleed of respect, the erosion of boundaries. She just saw a brother who had always given and suddenly stopped, and it made her uncomfortable. But the table wasn't the real betrayal. That was just the surface layer. What came next, though? That was the punch to the gut. I was visiting my aunt, Mom's sister, about 2 weeks later. She and I had always gotten along well. She'd never treated me like an afterthought. She made good coffee, gave great advice, and never once asked me to fix anything when I visited. I think she always knew more than she let on, but she stayed out of it. We were sitting on her porch, watching the sunset when she glanced over and said, "So, you and your parents still not talking?" I gave a small shrug. "Not really. Figured I'd let them sit with it for a bit." She nodded. "You know they took your name off their living trust, right?" The words didn't register right away. "What?" She hesitated. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I thought you already knew. Your mom told me they made some changes last month. Said it didn't make sense to split everything when Melissa was the one who'll be taking care of them someday." I stared at her. I couldn't breathe for a second. My ears rang. "You're serious?" She nodded slowly. I told her it was a mistake. "She just said you were doing fine on your own." That phrase again. Doing fine. It had become the excuse for every betrayal, every act of exclusion, every quiet reallocation of love, trust, and resources. I left my aunt's house in a daze. I don't remember the drive home. I just remember sitting in the dark afterward, on the edge of my bed, and feeling something in me crack. Not loudly, not like a movie scene where someone screams and throws a lamp. No, this was quiet, like the gentle snap of ice forming a fissure under pressure. They took me off the trust, without telling me, without asking, without even having the decency to hint at it in all those conversations about the future we'd had when I helped them budget or fix the roof or organize their taxes. All those years I was the reliable one, doing fine, and they erased me from the plan because Melissa was around. The next few days passed in a fog. I didn't eat much. I didn't answer texts. I didn't go to the gym. Just kind of floated through the hours. My condo was quiet, peaceful, even, but it didn't feel like home. Not that week. I kept replaying things in my head. Every moment where I let something go. Every time I didn't speak up. Every bill I paid. Every favor I did. Every holiday where I watched Melissa stumble in late and still get praised for being thoughtful. And I realized that I hadn't just been keeping score. I'd been hoping the scoreboard would eventually matter. But it never did. Until now. Because here's the thing. I wasn't just removed from a document. I was removed from the equation. And in that silence, I made a decision. Not to confront. Not to demand. Not to yell or rage or beg. I decided to step away completely. But not quietly. If I was no longer part of the family equation, then they would finally learn what it meant to lose the part that kept the machine running behind the scenes. And I had a plan. There's this weird thing that happens when you hit a wall emotionally. At first, you feel like you're just floating. Not in some poetic, peaceful way, either. More like you're drifting in space with no air, watching your life from outside your own body, wondering how you got here. After finding out I'd been removed from the living trust, I didn't rage or cry or call them to scream. I didn't write some dramatic email or craft a long, heartfelt message begging them to understand. I just shut down. Quietly. Cleanly. I turned off the faucet. No more calls. No more visits. No more help. For the first time in my adult life, I drew a clear line, and I didn't budge. At first, it was liberating. My phone didn't light up with "Can you swing by?" texts. I didn't spend weekends elbow deep in leaky plumbing or debugging my dad's ancient laptop. I didn't worry about whether Melissa was going to guilt trip me into splitting her rent just this once. But that freedom had a price, and I felt it hard. See, when you've built your identity around being the one people can count on, you don't realize how much of your self-worth is tied to other people's problems. I wasn't just grieving the betrayal. I was grieving the version of myself I'd always been for them. The helper. The problem solver. The safety net. Without that role, I didn't know who I was anymore. I stopped answering calls from extended family, not out of bitterness, but because I couldn't stomach the small talk. I avoided social events. I even started skipping gym sessions, which had always been my sanctuary. My routine fell apart. I stopped cooking, let laundry pile up, and worked just enough to get by. My boss noticed. He didn't say anything at first, but eventually, we had a talk. "You all right, Tyler?" he asked one morning, catching me zoning out during a team meeting. I gave the usual answer. Just a lot on my plate lately. He nodded, but the concern lingered in his eyes. I knew I had to pull myself out of it, but motivation felt like a distant memory. Every time I tried to get back on track, my mind wandered back to that conversation with my aunt. The trust, the deed, the fact that I could dedicate my life to being the good son and still get cut out the moment I wasn't useful. But then something shifted, not all at once, but gradually. It started with the patio set. I don't know why it bugged me so much. It wasn't about the table, obviously, but every time I thought about Melissa dragging it into their backyard like it was hers, like she had a right to just take whatever she wanted and expect me to be okay with it, I felt this slow-burning anger that wouldn't go away. So I got in my car, drove to their house early one Saturday morning, and reclaimed it. Didn't knock. Didn't announce myself. Just walked into the backyard like I owned the place. Because for most of my life, it had been mine in a way. I took the table apart, loaded it piece by piece into my trunk, and drove off. Nobody was home. It felt petty, but it also felt good. That small act of reclaiming something, anything, snapped me out of my funk just enough to remember what it felt like to take action. That same week, I started journaling again. I hadn't done that since college, but it felt necessary. I needed to get the noise out of my head. The first few pages were raw, just ramblings, curses I won't repeat here, and messy thoughts. But after a few entries, the noise settled. The writing turned into plans, goals, ideas. I made a list of all the things I'd put on hold for the sake of my family over the years. One of them was starting my own business. I'd always talked about launching a software tool, something niche, something useful. Back in 2020, I'd even built a prototype for a scheduling app tailored for freelance photographers. I had a couple of photographer friends who loved it, but I shelved the project when Dad lost some of his income, and I picked up freelance work to help them stay afloat. Now, with all this free time, and no more surprise bills showing up from Mom, I decided to dust it off. I worked on it quietly, late at night, headphones on, eating microwave dinners while coding like I was back in college. It gave me purpose, gave me momentum. I didn't talk to anyone about it, not because I was trying to be mysterious, but because I didn't want anyone's approval. I just wanted to do something for me. And slowly, I started coming back to life. The gym became routine again. I changed my diet. I reconnected with a few old friends, people I hadn't talked to in years because I was always too busy helping the family. One of them, Jordan, invited me to join his hiking group. I almost said no, but something in me whispered, say yes. That first hike was brutal. I was out of breath halfway up the trail, legs burning, lungs on fire. But the view at the top? Worth it. More than that, it felt symbolic. Like I was physically climbing out of the pit I'd been wallowing in for months. That night, I slept like a rock for the first time in ages. Meanwhile, the app was starting to take shape. I spent my evenings building features, testing bugs, and designing a clean UI. I'd post updates on a small dev forum, and the feedback was encouraging. People were genuinely interested. A few months in, I launched a beta, got a few dozen signups, then 100. Then one of my photographer friends shared it on her Instagram, and it exploded. Not viral level, but enough to get noticed in the niche. I woke up to emails from users in 3 different countries. Real people, real problems my app was solving. It felt unreal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just helping people in the background. I was building something that mattered, and it wasn't for my parents, or my sister, or anyone else. It was for me. That's when I realized something deeper. My entire life, I had been trying to earn their validation, playing the role, carrying the weight, hoping that one day they'd turn around and say, "We see you. We appreciate you." But that day never came, and maybe it never would. And somehow, that was okay now, because I had built something on my own, without their help, without their permission. And then, right when I was finally finding peace in that independence, I got a text that reminded me the storm hadn't passed. It had just been gathering. It was from Melissa. "Hey, just a heads up, Mom and Dad are talking about selling the house. Said they're thinking of buying something smaller and putting the rest toward retirement. I told them they should probably talk to you first." She even added a smiley face at the end, like we were just 2 siblings casually coordinating. But all I saw was red. Selling the house. The house I'd spent years maintaining? The house I'd helped pay for when they were struggling? The house that, until recently, had been promised to both of us equally? And now they were thinking of selling it, without me. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the fact that they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They didn't expect me to be part of the conversation because, in their minds, I wasn't. I had been written out of the story, but they underestimated something important. I may have been quiet. I may have been distant, but I wasn't powerless. Because what they didn't know, what they had no way of knowing, was that I hadn't just been rebuilding my confidence. I'd been documenting everything. Every bank transfer, every utility bill I covered, every time I paid for repairs or maintenance or groceries. I had receipts going back 5 years. Even screenshots of texts from Mom and Melissa confirming I'd paid certain things until they got back on their feet. I hadn't planned on using any of it. Not originally. But if they were going to play games with property and money, then maybe it was time I stopped being the background character in this story. Maybe it was time I reminded them exactly how much I'd invested, and just how much I had left to lose. They always thought I didn't keep track. That was their first mistake. See, for years, my family had operated on this unspoken dynamic. I helped, they expected. I gave, they took. No drama, no questions. I wasn't loud about it. I didn't wave receipts in anyone's face. I just handled things, quietly, efficiently, the way a good son was supposed to. But underneath that calm surface, I kept everything. Every dollar. Every transaction. Every favor disguised as just a quick thing. And now, with Melissa's casual text about them selling the house, it all clicked into place. They had no intention of circling back to me. I wasn't going to get a say in anything. Not after they'd added Melissa to the deed, removed me from the trust, and shut me out of decisions I'd spent over a decade helping them navigate. I could see it playing out before it even happened. They'd sell the house, maybe gift Melissa the proceeds in some roundabout way to avoid taxes, and I'd be left watching from the sidelines, told to be grateful because I was doing fine. But they didn't realize something. I wasn't just a guy with hurt feelings anymore. I had leverage, and I was ready to use it. The first step was getting organized. I spent an entire weekend digging through emails, online banking records, and old text threads. I exported PDFs of bank statements showing every time I'd paid their water, electricity, or gas bills. Screenshotted messages from Mom asking for help with a surprise car repair. Pulled receipts from when I covered Melissa's half of a vacation they insisted she'd pay me back for. She never did. I even had Venmo notes labeled Mom's Meds and Roof Patch 2021. I didn't realize how much I'd contributed until I saw it all laid out in a spreadsheet. Total, $38,227.17. That's what I'd spent over 8 years, just on them. That didn't even include the interest I lost on savings or the freelance projects I'd passed up when they needed help moving furniture, fixing a leak, or dog sitting just for a day that turned into a weekend. Looking at the number made my stomach twist. Not because I wanted the money back, but because they discarded me like I hadn't already paid my share. Like I was just some distant relative with no stake in the family estate. That was about to change. The next step was confirming the status of the house. I had a suspicion, but I wanted to be sure. So I pulled up the county's property records website and searched their address. And there it was. Melissa, listed as co-owner. Added 7 months ago. No liens, no mortgage refinance. Just a straight-up deed transfer, parents to daughter. Likely using a quitclaim deed, which meant it happened quietly, without triggering red flags. I stared at the screen for a long time. She didn't pay a dime for it. Didn't lift a finger during the years I was pouring time and money into that house. But now, she had legal standing. She owned part of it. That should have been the part that broke me. But it didn't. Because I had something better than ownership. I had proof. And a plan. Step 1 was legal. I wasn't going to go full courtroom drama, but I wanted to know where I stood. So I called an attorney. Not some billboard, we get you cash, guy. I found a small, highly rated estate attorney in town named Harold who specialized in family disputes and financial contribution claims. We met over coffee. I brought my spreadsheet, my screenshots, my receipts, and my story. He listened quietly, barely interrupting as I laid it all out. When I finished, he leaned back, folded his hands, and said, "Let me guess, they didn't put anything in writing?" "Not officially," I said, "but I've got texts, emails, a record of all my payments." He nodded. "Good. That's more than most people in your situation have." I was surprised. "So, is there anything I can do? Legally, I mean." He tapped the table. "Potentially. If they sell the house and you've made substantial contributions to its upkeep or improvements, especially if there was an implied understanding of future benefit. We can pursue something called a resulting trust claim or even an equitable contribution claim. It's not guaranteed, but it's strong enough to make them think twice about shutting you out. I blinked. Wait, so I could sue them? For part of the house proceeds. You could threaten to. Whether you follow through or not depends on what you want out of this. That was the moment the gears started turning. I didn't want a legal war. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone's life. But if they were going to erase me from the picture, then maybe a well-timed reminder of what I brought to the table was exactly what they needed. And it had to come from the one person they never expected it from. Me. Step 2 was timing. I didn't confront them right away. I waited. I watched. Melissa's text had been vague, thinking of selling, which meant the process was still in motion. So I bided my time. Polished my app. Attended networking events. Went on hikes. Even started dating again. Meanwhile, Harold drafted a letter. Not a lawsuit. Just a formal notification of intent to pursue compensation in the event of a sale, citing financial contributions, documented proof, and a clear pattern of expectation built over years. It wasn't aggressive, but it was firm, and I held on to it. For the right moment. That moment came 3 weeks later. I got a text from Mom. The first in over 2 months. Hey sweetheart, I know things have been weird, but we'd really love to have you over for dinner next Sunday. Just us. Melissa won't be there. Let's talk. I stared at it for a while. And then I smiled. Perfect. I showed up at their house that Sunday with a bottle of wine and an envelope in my coat pocket. They greeted me like nothing had happened. Mom hugged me a little too long. Dad gave me one of those firm, manly pats on the back. The kitchen smelled like roast chicken and garlic, the exact kind of meal they always made when they were trying to smooth things over. We sat down, ate, made small talk, laughed at a few stories. And then, halfway through dessert, Mom set down her fork and said, "We want to talk to you about something, and I want you to listen before you say anything." I leaned back, hands folded in my lap. "We've decided to sell the house," she said. "We just can't manage the upkeep anymore. The plan is to move into a smaller place, something single level, closer to Melissa. She'll help out more that way." "Of course she will." Dad jumped in. "We know this might come as a surprise, but we've talked it through. We're going to split the proceeds with Melissa and use the rest to secure our retirement." That's when I knew. They were offering me nothing. They didn't even try to dress it up. "No, we'll talk about your share." No mention of everything I'd done. Just a cold, polite conversation about their future, with me placed neatly outside of it. I pulled out the envelope. Set it on the table. "What's this?" Dad asked. "Documentation," I said. "Every dollar I've contributed to this house over the last 8 years. Bills, repairs, groceries, payments. It's all there. Along with a letter from my attorney." Mom's face went pale. "Tyler, what is this?" "I'm not suing you," I said calmly. "Yet. But if you plan to sell this house and leave me with nothing, I want you to understand something. This isn't just emotional anymore. This is financial. And I have every right to pursue compensation for what I've put into this property. You can split the proceeds however you want. But if my name isn't on that list, then you'll be hearing from Harold." Silence. Not angry silence. Stunned silence. They hadn't expected this version of me. The son who didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't cry. The son who kept receipts. Mom's lip trembled. "You would really take us to court?" "If I have to," I said, standing up. "But I'd rather not. I'd rather we have an honest conversation about fairness, about respect, about not treating me like a walking bank account while rewarding Melissa for being around." Dad opened the envelope. Scanned the spreadsheet. The numbers hit him hard. I saw it in his face. "I don't want to fight," I added, "but I won't be erased." And with that, I walked out. Calm, collected, clear. The setup was complete. Now all I had to do was wait for their next move. They didn't call the next day, or the day after that. I expected one of them to reach out, maybe a defensive voicemail from Dad, or a guilt-laced text from Mom. But the silence stretched. A week passed, then another. It wasn't until day 12 that I finally heard something. This time, it was Melissa. "I heard you threatened to sue Mom and Dad." "Seriously?" "No, hey. No pleasantries. Just straight to the point." I didn't respond. 3 minutes later. "This is low even for you. You're really going to take them to court after everything they've done for you?" That line almost made me laugh. Everything they've done for me? I wanted to ask if she meant the unpaid housework, the thousands of dollars, the broken promises, The uninvited betrayal on the deed. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. Let her stew in the version of events she'd built to protect herself from any sense of responsibility. By the end of the week, a formal email arrived. From my parents. Polite. Sterile. Probably drafted with the help of a lawyer. They had reconsidered the distribution of the home sale and were open to a conversation about equitable financial resolution in light of the historical contributions I had made. They even acknowledged, in writing, that I'd supported them financially on numerous occasions. That wasn't just a win. That was leverage. I didn't rush to reply. Let them sweat a little longer. I forwarded the email to Harold and scheduled one last meeting. We drafted a response. Again, no threats, no drama, just calm professionalism. I asked for $45,000. It was more than I'd spent, but less than what I'd be entitled to in court if we factored in interest, inflation, and lost opportunities. It was a fair offer. They agreed. Without protest. The revenge, in the end, wasn't loud. It wasn't fire and fury. It was paper. Calm, collected, legal pressure, the kind of thing people like my parents never expected from someone like me. The sale went through the next month. I received a direct wire transfer of $45,000, plus an additional $1,500 to cover legal costs, though they didn't say it outright. No apology letter. No follow-up call. Just silence. Melissa didn't reach out again, but I did hear about her eventually. Apparently, after they moved into their new place, a modest 2-bedroom condo closer to her apartment, things got complicated. My parents, now used to relying on me for every little crisis, found Melissa's brand of help lacking. She didn't want to run errands, didn't answer her phone at night, started ducking out of weekend visits with vague excuses. After all the years they'd invested in enabling her, they were finally learning what it meant to rely on someone who wasn't built for it. A few months later, I got an email from my mom. It was short, just 4 lines. Tyler, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to say we miss you. Things haven't been the same. If you're open to it, maybe we can talk sometime. Love. Mom. I stared at the screen for a long time. She had my number, my address. She could have picked up the phone, but she didn't. She sent a cold email, like she was applying for an interview. I didn't reply, because here's the truth. Revenge doesn't always have to be fire and brimstone. Sometimes, the best revenge is letting people feel the weight of your absence, letting them sit in the silence they created, letting them realize too late that they pushed away the only person who never needed to be asked for help. I used their money to fund the second phase of my app, hired a small team, upgraded the servers, invested in better marketing. 6 months later, we hit 10,000 active users. Revenue was steady. My calendar was full. And my life? Peaceful. No more emergency calls. No more passive-aggressive messages. No more quiet expectations that I'd sweep in and fix the chaos they created. They taught me that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by respect. And once that's gone, you don't owe them anything. Not even a reply. That was the last time I ever heard from them. And I didn't miss them. Not even a little. My name's Owen. I'm 31. And if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have told you my relationship with my family was complicated. That was before it escalated to betrayal. Not the screaming match kind of betrayal, but the cold, smiling, stab you with a spoon kind that makes you question if you ever really belonged to them in the first place. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. That's what my mom called me. My sister, Heather, was the creative spirit, and my younger brother, Ryan, was the baby of the family. And me? I was the one they leaned on when things needed fixing, whether it was a leaky faucet, a broken laptop, or later in life, a credit card bill they forgot to pay. When I landed my first real job in tech out west, things changed. I started making decent money, nothing outrageous, but enough to help when someone called crying at 2 a.m. because their rent check bounced. Enough to front hotel bookings for holidays when mom's card declined again, or Heather's freelance gig fell through. I did it willingly. At first, a few months ago, we had our usual family group call to talk about our upcoming summer trip, a tradition we started years ago when Dad was still around. After he passed, I made sure we kept it going. It was his favorite time of year, sand between his toes, a beer in hand, and all of us together. This year, I offered to book the place early, just like I always did. I even said I'd cover the deposit. No big deal. 3 weeks passed. Then a month. The group chat was silent except for Heather occasionally sending a meme or Mom forwarding some chain message about natural remedies for heartburn. I finally texted, "Hey, what's the plan for the summer trip?" The response didn't come from Heather or Ryan, but Mom. Just a short message. "It's just too expensive to include you this year, honey. We'll figure something next time." I stared at the screen for a long time. Too expensive to include me? I thought I misread it. I called her. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. I left a message. Polite, trying not to sound hurt. "Hey, just wanted to clarify the message. Let me know if there's something going on." She texted me back the next morning. "We're keeping it low-key this year. Everyone's had a hard time financially. Hope you understand." I tried to. I really did. I told myself maybe they needed a break. Maybe it wasn't personal. I buried myself in work, trying not to spiral. But then, late one Thursday night, I was scrolling through Instagram, half asleep on the couch, when Heather's post popped up. A boomerang of her and Ryan clinking cocktails, ocean in the background. The caption? Sun, sand, and sibling time blue heart hashtag Villa Vibes. Villa Vibes. I blinked. Wait, Villa? I clicked on her tag location. It was a luxury beach house rental in the same town we'd gone to for the past 6 years. I knew that place. I'd sent it to Mom as a suggestion back in April. I recognized the patio furniture, the infinity pool that dropped off into the cliffside. My hands started to shake. I scrolled through the photos. There was Mom, stretched out in a cabana with a mimosa. Ryan posing shirtless by the grill. Heather in a designer sundress, holding a sparkler at sunset. The kicker? A selfie in front of a framed welcome note. "Thanks for choosing Ocean Crest Villas. Guest, Owen Fields." My name. They used my name to book the place, which meant they'd used my account. My credit card. I stood up so fast I knocked over the glass on my coffee table. My pulse was in my ears. I went to my laptop, pulled up the confirmation email I'd received weeks ago and hadn't thought twice about. Sure enough, there it was. Reservation confirmed. Payment processed. See you July 10th to 17th. They hadn't just excluded me. They erased me. Booked the trip with my money, stayed at the villa with my name, and pretended I didn't exist. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, cycling between anger, disbelief, and hurt. I kept refreshing their socials, watching their stories as they danced, laughed, toasted to family, all while I sat alone in my apartment. The next morning, I called my bank, asked if there was any way to flag the charge. They said since I had confirmed the booking, there wasn't much they could do, unless I suspected fraud. Fraud. That word sat in my chest like a rock. I didn't respond to Mom's next message. "Hope you're doing okay, sweetie. We'll bring you something back from the beach." That's when I snapped. I booked the last-minute flight. Pricey, but I didn't care. Packed a bag with the essentials and threw on my old college hoodie, the same one Heather used to borrow when she missed me. The flight was short, but the drive to the villa felt endless. I didn't listen to music. I didn't call anyone. I just stared at the road, white-knuckling the steering wheel, rehearsing what I would say when I got there. When I finally pulled into the cul-de-sac, I sat in the car for a solid 5 minutes, just breathing. The villa looked even better in person. Warm lights glowing through the glass, laughter echoing faintly from the poolside. I could make out Ryan's voice. Then Mom's. They were talking about dinner. I walked up to the door and tried the code I always used when we rented houses. 0721, Dad's birthday. The lock clicked. They hadn't even changed it. When I opened the door, the sound hit me first. Music, clinking glasses, footsteps on tile. Heather was the first to see me. She froze mid-laugh, her cocktail tipping slightly in her hand. "What are you doing here?" she said, blinking like I was a hallucination. I dropped my duffel on the floor and stepped in. "I'm checking in," I said, calm as ever. "You've got 10 minutes to get out." And that's when Ryan stood up from the couch, confused. "Wait, what?" Heather looked at Mom, then back at me. "Owen, don't be dramatic." I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. Reservations in my name. Paid with my card. And I just spoke to the property manager before I walked in. Mom stepped forward, holding a wine glass. "Honey, listen. It's not what you think." I tilted my head, slowly. "Then explain it." She opened her mouth. And just then, the patio door slid open behind me. A voice called out, cheerful and unaware. "Hey, sorry to interrupt. I'm the villa manager. Just here to check in with Mr. Fields." I turned, smiled. "That's me." Mom's face turned white. And that's when the yelling began. Ryan was the first to raise his voice. You've got to be kidding me, Owen. You flew all the way here just to what? Embarrass everyone. Heather groaned. He's always had a flair for theatrics. The villa manager, a woman maybe in her mid-40s with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a confused smile frozen on her lips, looked between us. Is everything all right? I turned to her, keeping my voice level. Yes, it will be. Thank you for stopping by. I'm just sorting out a misunderstanding. She hesitated, eyes flicking to my mom and siblings, then nodded slowly. All right. Just needed to confirm the reservation. You're all checked in, Mr. Fields. Enjoy your stay. She stepped back outside, closing the door quietly behind her. And then the air changed. Mom finally spoke, softly at first. Owen, we weren't trying to hurt you. We just thought you wouldn't be interested this year. Not interested? I repeated, my voice flat. You mean the trip I suggested? The one I booked? That I paid for? Ryan crossed his arms. We were going to pay you back? Eventually. Eventually. I echoed, barely suppressing a laugh. And when exactly was that? Before or after I saw your Instagram post thanking the universe for family bonding? Heather sat down on the edge of the couch, avoiding my eyes. It was Mom's idea. Mom stiffened. Don't you dare put this on me, Heather. We all agreed. Really? I asked, eyebrows raised. You all sat down and agreed not to tell me? To leave me out of the trip and still use my name, my credit, and pretend it was all fine. Mom shifted uncomfortably. You're always working, Owen. We thought maybe you needed a break from everything. A break from you? I asked, voice suddenly sharper. That's what this is about. You've used me like a walking bank account for years. Rent, groceries, last-minute emergencies. And I never complained. Not once. But this. I stepped forward. This was planned. Deliberate. Heather muttered something under her breath, and I turned to her. What? I said maybe if you weren't so self-righteous all the time, we'd actually want to include you. That hit harder than I expected. I stared at her. You think I wanted to be the one who always shows up with the solution? Who fixes everything while you pretend you're too fragile to be held accountable? I looked around at all three of them, my voice quieter now. Do you even know what it feels like to realize you were never actually invited? Not just to the vacation, but to the family moments? You left me out. You looked at the person who kept this whole thing afloat and said, he doesn't matter. Ryan stood up, holding his hands out. All right, fine. You're mad. But showing up like this? Trying to kick us out? That's low. No, I said, stepping between them in the hallway. What's low is lying to me, pretending I wasn't invited because of budget issues while sipping wine in a villa I paid for. What's low is leaving me on read for 3 weeks and letting me find out from social media. Mom's voice trembled. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I stared at her for a long moment. The silence dragged on, and in that stillness, I saw something flicker in her face. Not guilt. Not shame. Just fear. Fear of losing the comfortable, familiar safety net I had become. I took a deep breath. You have 10 minutes to pack your things. I already called the company. Reservations under my name. And I just requested everyone else be removed from the guest list. Heather stood. You're serious. Dead serious. Ryan scoffed. Where are we even supposed to go? There's a cheap motel 2 towns over. Maybe if you call ahead, they'll leave the light on. Heather's mouth dropped open, but she said nothing. I turned to Mom last. She looked so small then. Smaller than I'd ever seen her. I would have paid for you all to come. Happily. I would have kept doing it, too, every year. But now, I think I finally see things clearly. She took a step forward, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. Owen, 10 minutes, I said. I suggest you start with the patio cushions. I'd hate for you to forget anything. I didn't wait for them to respond. I turned and walked toward the master bedroom, my room, the one I'd specifically asked for when I booked the place. As I closed the door behind me, I heard the faint sound of footsteps scrambling, voices raised in panic and protest. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the waves beyond the glass balcony. And then, I heard someone knock. Once, twice, 3 slow taps. Then Heather's voice, muffled through the door. Owen, wait. Just let us explain. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because they didn't know the half of what I'd already done. And they were about to find out. I sat there in silence, staring at the balcony door as the knocking stopped. Heather's footsteps shuffled away, and I heard hushed voices outside in the hallway. They were probably regrouping. Plotting. spinning a new version of events where they weren't the villains, maybe where I was the one overreacting. I wouldn't put it past them. I could already imagine Mom sighing dramatically, saying something like, "He's always been sensitive. Maybe we should just let him cool off." But this wasn't about me cooling off. This was about them finally feeling what I had felt for years. After a few minutes, I got up and walked over to the dresser. Inside was a little welcome packet, maps of the area, local restaurant recommendations, and, tucked in the back, the villa's Wi-Fi info and smart home settings. I smiled. With a few taps on my phone, I pulled up the connected app one used to manage the reservation, something none of them had bothered to notice in their rush to celebrate without me. I opened the guest list and began removing users. First, Heather Fields, then Ryan Fields, then Marla Fields, my mom. I hit save. A pop-up asked, "Remove access to Wi-Fi, smart locks, thermostat, and media system for these guests?" I tapped yes without hesitation. The villa suddenly felt different. Mine. Not just legally, but emotionally. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just the wallet. I was the one making the decisions. I opened the bedroom door and stepped back into the hallway. Ryan was standing near the kitchen island, halfway through stuffing a bottle of wine into his duffel bag. "Seriously?" I said, nodding at the bottle. He looked up and gave me that smug little smirk he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand. "We were going to open it tonight anyway." "Well, now you can open it somewhere else." He scoffed. "Come on, Owen. It's a bottle of wine. It's about respect. And the fact that you're still trying to take something from me after everything pretty much proves my point." Heather appeared behind him, holding her phone. "Okay, this is getting ridiculous. We get it, you're upset. Can we please just talk like adults?" "You had your chance," I said. "But instead of talking to me, you planned an entire trip behind my back, used my money, my name, and then acted shocked when I showed up." Mom came around the corner then, her face red and tired, a suitcase rolling behind her. "I don't know what you want from us, Owen," she said softly. "Accountability," I answered. "But I don't think I'll get that, so I'll settle for space. The kind you all so generously gave me when you decided I wasn't invited." She opened her mouth to respond, but then something strange happened. Her phone beeped, and she frowned. Why is the Wi-Fi down?" I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Because I removed your access." Ryan looked up. "What?" I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned the screen toward them. "Smart home controls. Also turns off the AC and the speakers. And locks." They looked at each other, suddenly realizing how quiet it had gotten. The gentle hum of the air conditioning had stopped. The music in the living room was gone. Even the television in the corner, which had been running a loop of beach footage, had cut to black. "You're insane," Heather said. I shrugged. "Just tech savvy. But if it makes you feel better, I also scheduled a rideshare to be here in 6 minutes. You'll want to be ready." Ryan laughed bitterly. "You think you can just throw us out?" "I don't think," I said, stepping closer, voice calm but firm. "I know. And the villa manager knows too. She made it clear I had full rights to the property. You all are technically trespassing now." Mom looked at the floor. Heather opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but no words came. Ryan muttered something about how this was so not over, but even he started zipping up his duffel bag. I watched them scramble, stuffing things into bags, checking their phones, which still had no connection. The power was still on, for now, but I disabled their profiles. No lights would work in their rooms. No streaming. No music. Just silence, and the slow realization that they weren't in control anymore. I went back to the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter as they made their way toward the front door. The tension in the air was so thick, you could feel it pressing against your chest. The doorbell rang. Right on time. Heather turned around, her suitcase rolling behind her. "You're seriously doing this?" "You seriously deserve this," I replied. The driver waited outside as they all shuffled past me one by one. Ryan didn't look at me. Mom gave me a look that was more exhaustion than anger. And Heather, she lingered. "You're really not the person I thought you were," she said quietly. I stared back at her. "Good. Maybe now you'll stop thinking I'm a doormat." She blinked, then stepped outside, the door closing behind her with a soft click. I stood there in the silence, not moving, just breathing, listening to the wind and the faint sound of waves rolling in from the cliffs. And then I noticed something. Their bags were gone. Their voices were fading. But they'd left something behind. On the hallway table. A handwritten card. I walked over, picked it up, and opened it. It wasn't an apology. It was worse. It was a bill. Folded inside the card, with Mom's handwriting on the envelope, was a receipt from a high-end seafood restaurant down the beach. Dated 2 nights ago. Total, $468.32. A little note scribbled underneath in Heather's handwriting. Since you're covering the trip, figured you'd want to keep this for your records, smiley face. I stared at it for a long time, the paper crinkling slightly in my fist. And that's when I made the next call. Because they didn't know that the revenge wasn't over yet. Not even close. I held that receipt in my hand like it was radioactive. My first instinct was to laugh, not because it was funny, but because the audacity had gone beyond infuriating. It had reached some twisted level of irony I couldn't even process at first. They knew what they were doing. Even after being confronted, humiliated, kicked out, they still thought I'd pick up the tab like always. Like clockwork. I walked into the living room, sat down on the couch they'd all lounged on for the past few days, and stared at the waves through the giant glass doors. The villa was quiet now. No fake laughs, no staged selfies, no one draining my account behind my back. Just me and the faint sound of the ocean rolling against the cliffs. And I wasn't done yet. I opened the app again and navigated to the billing settings for the villa. My card was still linked to the reservation, but I had a backup plan. I called the rental company directly and got a woman named Larissa on the line. I explained what had happened, calmly, respectfully, even though my jaw was clenched the entire time. To my surprise, Larissa didn't sound shocked. "This actually happens more often than you'd think," she said with a sigh. "People using someone else's info, making it look like a group trip, then sticking them with the bill. But since the reservation was under your name and your payment method, you do have recourse. Which is, you're eligible for an incident report. You can flag the reservation as fraudulent use, and we'll freeze the remaining charges and refund a portion, especially if the unauthorized guests have already vacated." How much of a refund? We'd have to calculate based on damage, usage, and remaining nights. But you may be able to recoup most of the cost. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in hours. "Do it." She paused. "Would you like to submit a list of items they used or damaged?" I thought about the wine Ryan tried to smuggle out. The guest towels. The Bluetooth speaker that wasn't where it had been yesterday. "Yes," I said. "And send me the official report. I'll need it for something else." "Of course," she replied. "Anything else I can do?" "Actually, yeah. Can you send a notification to all removed guests confirming they've been flagged from future rentals under this property group?" Larissa didn't miss a beat. "Consider it done." After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of water and sat back, heart still racing. Because I wasn't just going to leave it there. A part of me, the part that had been silent and patient for far too long, was ready to draw a line that couldn't be erased. I opened my laptop and logged into the shared family cloud account, the same one I'd created years ago when I was trying to help Mom organize her finances. It was where I stored everything for them, scanned receipts, trip itineraries, even family medical records. They never changed the password. They probably forgot it even existed. I uploaded the villa confirmation, the email thread, and Larissa's incident report. I attached the seafood receipt with Heather's little smirk of a message. And then I added a final PDF, a simple letter I typed up right then and there. To Mom, Heather, and Ryan. Effective immediately, I will no longer be covering any financial expenses for any of you. This includes, but is not limited to, rent, groceries, vacations, emergencies, car payments, and last-minute favors. I've canceled all linked accounts and removed my name from any subscriptions or services you may have attached me to. Going forward, if you attempt to use my identity or financial information for any reason, I will treat it as fraud and respond accordingly, legally. This was not a difficult decision. You made it easy. Owen. I titled the folder Final Transaction. Then I logged out and deleted the shared access from all their devices. 2 hours later, I got the first text. "Heather, are you serious? You cancel my phone plan?" Then Ryan. "Bro, I need my Netflix back." And finally, Mom. "I don't understand what you're doing. This feels extreme. We're family." I didn't respond. Not at first. I let the silence stretch, just like they had let mine stretch for weeks when I was asking about the trip. It wasn't until the next morning that I replied. One text. One line. "Family doesn't steal from each other and call it love." They didn't respond after that. But I wasn't done. There was one more move I had to make. I contacted my dad's old attorney. He handled Dad's estate, and even though we hadn't spoken in years, he still remembered me. I explained the situation, especially the part about my name being used without consent. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I said no, but I did ask him to revise the letter of intent that outlined future inheritance rights, something my mom never thought I knew about. Turns out, after Dad passed, she had quietly set things up so that all 3 kids would inherit equally, no matter who contributed what. I changed that. The attorney agreed that given the new documentation and financial burden I'd taken on, I had grounds to challenge the arrangement and protect my contributions. It was official within a week. They wouldn't see a cent from anything tied to my name again, not unless I chose to give it. And I wouldn't. Not after that summer. The rest of the trip, I stayed at the villa, alone, and it was peaceful. I walked along the beach in the mornings, read books on the balcony, cooked my own meals, and watched the sunset without the weight of performative togetherness. For the first time in years, I wasn't performing. I wasn't overextending, placating, or trying to earn a seat at a table that didn't respect me. I made peace with it, and with myself. On the last day, before I locked up, I left a note on the kitchen counter. Nothing dramatic, just 4 simple words. Not yours anymore, Owen. And I meant it. When I got back home, I blocked all 3 of them. I knew they'd try again eventually, with apologies, justifications, crocodile tears. But by then, I had rebuilt my boundaries into something solid, something permanent. I still get birthday cards from Mom. Still see Heather post about family love online. Still hear through mutual friends that Ryan's struggling with bills and that he doesn't understand why Owen turned into such a fool. Let them wonder. Let them sit with the silence they created. Because in the end, I didn't just take back my vacation. I took back my dignity, my peace, and I never looked back. I'll never forget the night my brother got engaged, not because it was beautiful or emotional, but because it was the night everything came crashing down. I'm Jake, 27, and I've spent most of my life learning how to make myself smaller around people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I wasn't the golden child. That title belonged to my older brother, Nathan. And believe me, Nathan wore that crown with pride. Ever since we were kids, our parents doted on him like he was some kind of royalty. Every achievement, every birthday, every scraped knee was treated like it deserved a parade. Meanwhile, I was just there. Not quite forgotten, but definitely optional. The thing is, I never wanted a spotlight. I didn't need confetti or trophies. I just wanted fairness, basic, human decency. But in our house, fairness was a myth, and I learned early on not to expect anything that wasn't attached to Nathan's name. He got the new clothes while I wore his hand-me-downs. He got the car for his 16th birthday. I got a bus pass. He got praise for AC+ in math, while I got silence for straight A's. And when I tried to talk to my parents about it, they said I was too sensitive or jealous. So I stopped trying. I built my own world outside of them, a world where I didn't have to measure myself against someone who would always come first. But no matter how far I tried to run, there were some things I couldn't outrun, like the medical debt that nearly buried me a few years back. At 22, I got hit with a rare autoimmune condition. Hospital visits, tests, medication, more tests. It felt like my body had declared war on itself, and I was just collateral damage. Insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. I was drowning in bills, trying to stay in school and keep a roof over my head while pretending I wasn't terrified every single day. I reached out to my parents once, just once. I sent them a long message explaining everything, how bad it had gotten, and how I didn't know what else to do. I asked if they could help, even just a little. I never got a reply. Nathan later told me they saw the message and thought I was being dramatic. He said, "You're smart, Jake. You'll figure it out." That was it. That was the sum total of empathy I got from my own family. So I did what I always did. I figured it out. I took on 2 jobs, cut every expense I could, and eventually paid most of it off, though not without sacrifice. I had to drop out of school for a while. I lost friends. I almost lost my apartment. And through it all, I told myself the same lie over and over. They didn't know how bad it was. But deep down, I think I always knew they just didn't care enough to find out. So when Nathan invited me to his engagement dinner 6 months ago, I wasn't exactly thrilled. But I went. Not because I cared about the celebration. Honestly, I didn't even like his fiancée all that much, but because I wanted to see them. All of them. Together. I needed to look them in the eyes. Maybe part of me still hoped I'd finally get an explanation. Or maybe I just wanted closure. Either way, I showed up. The dinner was at a fancy Italian place downtown. White tablecloths, wine that tasted like it came from a magazine ad, and the kind of menu where you needed a translator app just to order. Nathan was in his element, of course, shaking hands, making toasts, acting like he was the groom at a royal wedding. Mom was glowing, hanging on to his every word. Dad was all proud smiles, laughing too loudly at Nathan's jokes. And me? I sat at the far end of the table, 3 seats away from the nearest conversation, sipping water and waiting for someone, anyone, to ask how I'd been. No one did. We were halfway through dinner when Mom leaned over and said, "Isn't this nice, Jake? It's good to have the whole family together again." I gave her a tight smile and nodded. It wasn't nice. It was surreal, like watching a movie where you're in the scene, but no one can see you. Later, as the plates were cleared and someone ordered another bottle of overpriced wine, Dad raised his glass and toasted to family. That's when something in me snapped, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, final way. The kind of snap you don't hear until everything around it starts to unravel. I set my glass down and cleared my throat. "Hey, quick question," I said, as casually as I could. "Do you guys remember when I got sick a few years ago? Like really sick?" The table quieted a bit. Dad tilted his head, squinting like he was trying to place a distant memory. Mom froze, still holding her fork midair. Nathan looked up from his phone. "Of course," Dad said eventually, his voice light. "Why?" I remember reaching out for help. I continued, my voice steady. "And I never got a response. I figured maybe you didn't see the message. But now that we're all here, I'm just wondering, why didn't you help?" There was a beat of silence. Then Dad chuckled. Actually chuckled. He leaned back in his chair like I'd just asked why we didn't buy name-brand cereal growing up. "We thought your brother's wedding would be more important," he said, grinning like it was a harmless joke. The table erupted into awkward laughter. Everyone except me. I didn't laugh. I didn't move. I just stared at him. More important. Those 2 words echoed in my head like a slap. Not, "we couldn't afford it." Not, "we didn't know how bad it was." Just, more important. That's when I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. I hadn't planned on doing this. Not really. I brought the folder out of instinct, like a safety net I didn't think I'd need. But the moment those words left his mouth, I knew exactly why I'd brought it. I laid it gently on the table in front of me. Thick, worn, crammed with printed statements, medical records, insurance denials, photos of the hospital bed I called home for nearly 3 months. A timeline of everything they chose to ignore. "You might want to read this before dessert," I said, voice low. Dad's smile faltered. Mom's fork clinked against her plate. Nathan finally looked up from his phone. Their faces said everything. And that's when I knew I wasn't done yet. Nathan reached out first. His hand brushed the edge of the folder like he wasn't sure if it might bite him. His fiancée, Rachel, leaned over his shoulder, squinting at the contents with a wrinkle in her nose, like it was something unpleasant she hadn't expected to deal with tonight. Maybe a stray piece of spinach on the tablecloth, or a whiff of something rotten. I watched them flip through the first few pages. Hospital admission forms, billing statements with balance amounts in the thousands, denial letters from insurance companies, all with my name on them. All dated over a period of 14 brutal months. Mom didn't move. Her wine glass hung limply from her fingers. Dad was still trying to keep the smile on his face, like he thought if he smiled long enough, this would turn into a joke. Like maybe I was going to yell "gotcha" and laugh it off. But I didn't. I sat still and waited. Nathan's face changed first. The smugness dropped. His brow furrowed, and he leaned in, flipping another few pages. He didn't say anything. He just looked confused. Then he turned to Mom. "Did you guys seriously ignore all this?" he asked, holding up a sheet with a $9,800 balance due stamp circled in red. She didn't answer. She just blinked. Then she reached out, took the folder from him, and started flipping through it herself, her lips tightening with every page. "I sent you everything," I said. "The first bill, the diagnosis, even the letter from the hospital threatening to send me to collections. You saw it. You just didn't care." Dad scoffed and waved a hand. "Jake, you're being dramatic again. You always do this, bringing up the past. This is your brother's big night, and you want to make it about you?" I blinked. I'd been expecting deflection, but not that fast. "You made it about him. I said, my voice colder than I expected. Every single time. When I was lying in a hospital bed, throwing up blood, you were buying Nathan a new suit for a job interview. When I got discharged with barely enough money to pay rent, you were helping Nathan and Rachel put down a deposit on a condo. When I was begging you for help, you didn't even reply. And now you're telling me I'm making it about me. You should have been more responsible, Dad said, shrugging like this was a casual conversation and not my breaking point. You could have taken out better insurance. You could have. I was a college student with part-time income and an autoimmune disease. I cut in. You think I wanted to get sick? That shut him up. For a second. Then Mom finally found her voice. Jake, you don't understand how hard it is to split things fairly, she said, carefully setting the folder down like it was some sort of toxic substance. We had to prioritize. Prioritize. I repeated. So, not just ignore. You chose not to help me. We were trying to keep the family from falling apart, she continued, her voice taking on that soft, patronizing tone she always used when she wanted to end an argument without answering for anything. Nathan had just gotten engaged. It was a huge milestone. We couldn't exactly. So my health didn't count as a milestone? I said, leaning forward. Is that what we're saying here? I should have gotten a ring instead of a diagnosis. Her mouth snapped shut. Rachel leaned closer to Nathan and whispered something, but I caught a few words. Why didn't you tell me? Nathan gave her a helpless look. I didn't know it was this bad. No, you didn't, I said, turning to him. Because you never asked. You were busy letting Mom and Dad bankroll your new life while I was rationing my medication. He had the decency to look guilty, but not guilty enough to say anything meaningful. Dad stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. His voice came out louder than necessary, clearly trying to reclaim authority. All right, this conversation's done. We're not airing dirty laundry at a restaurant. I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected like this. Funny, I said, standing up as well. That's how I felt for the last 5 years. A few heads turned from nearby tables. The waiter hovering near the bar took a cautious step back. No one at our table moved. I picked up the folder and tucked it back into my bag. The silence was thick, uncomfortable, like everyone was waiting for someone else to fix it. That's when Nathan said the one thing that truly broke me. Jake, come on. They helped when it mattered. I turned to him slowly. When it mattered? Look, I'm not saying what they did was right, he said, hands raised, trying to smooth things over. But it's not like your situation was permanent. I mean, you got through it, didn't you? I felt something go hollow inside me. Yeah, I said, my voice nearly a whisper. I got through it. Alone. And then I sat back down. Not because I wanted to stay, but because I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me walk away like I was the problem. I wanted them to squirm. I wanted them to sit in it. Rachel pushed her plate away. Nathan looked like he was suddenly very interested in the pattern on the tablecloth. My parents kept their eyes on their wine glasses. For the rest of the meal, no one spoke to me. And I didn't speak to them. But something shifted that night. A crack in the foundation they thought would always hold. And I wasn't done yet. The days after the dinner were a strange blur of passive-aggressive texts, silence, and one-word replies from my parents. Nathan didn't reach out at all, and neither did Rachel. I half expected a call from my mom the next day to smooth things over. She was the type who hated conflict unless she was controlling it. But nothing came. Instead, 2 days later, I got a message from my aunt, my dad's sister, asking if I was okay. I hadn't spoken to her in a while, not out of animosity, just distance. She'd always been the odd one out in the family, more grounded, less performative. She'd seen the fallout at the dinner secondhand through the family grapevine, and she wanted to hear my side. So I told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a few seconds. Then she said, Jake, I knew they favored Nathan, but I didn't know it was this bad. That's unforgivable. And then she told me something I didn't know. Apparently, my parents did have the money to help. Not just scraping by money. They had access to a sizable inheritance from my late grandfather. Money that had been divided between the siblings with the intention that it be used for family emergencies. Each sibling had control over their own share. My father? He'd used some of his to help Nathan with the condo and the engagement ring. The rest was still sitting in an account. When I asked why I wasn't told about this sooner, my aunt said quietly, because your father didn't tell anyone you asked for help. We only found out after what happened at the dinner. That's when the last piece clicked into place. This wasn't just negligence. It was intentional. I hung up, heart pounding, a new kind of fire building inside me. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was betrayal. Calculated. Chosen. They had chosen to watch me suffer. And now I had to decide what to do with that. When I hung up the phone with my aunt, I sat there for a long time, just staring at the wall of my apartment. My apartment wasn't much, small, one bedroom, drafty windows, but it was mine. I'd fought like hell to keep it during the worst of the medical storm. I'd eaten rice and eggs for weeks at a time to afford rent. I'd skipped medications, sold my gaming setup, and even pawned my watch, my graduation gift from a high school teacher, not my parents, to scrape by. I used to sit on that exact couch and convince myself that someday, things would even out, that the imbalance was just temporary, that my parents had to come around eventually, that maybe, just maybe, I mattered to them, even if they didn't show it in the same way. But now I had proof. Proof that they saw my pain, weighed it against my brother's engagement ring, and chose the sparkle. I think there's a very specific kind of silence that comes after betrayal. It's not dramatic. It's not loud or angry. It's the kind of quiet that sinks into your bones. Heavy, cold, still. For a few days, I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't respond to texts from coworkers. I ghosted my group chat. I even ignored my aunt when she followed up with just checking in, thinking of you. I wasn't depressed. I was empty. But somewhere in that silence, a thought kept repeating itself like a whisper I couldn't shake. You made it without them. You survived. And it was true. Not because they helped. Not because they supported me. I survived because I refused to disappear. I clawed my way out of something they didn't even bother to look at. I still remember the night I finally snapped out of it. I was making dinner, just some pasta and frozen vegetables, and I opened the cabinet and found the last can of soup from the stash I kept during the worst of my health problems. A dented can of lentil soup, the label half peeled off, expiration date barely a month away. I stared at it. That soup had once been a lifeline, a backup plan when money was gone and options were limited. Now it was just a can of soup. I smiled. Something in me clicked. I'd already rebuilt once, without support, without guidance, without a safety net. What was stopping me now from building something better? Not just survival, not just scraping by, thriving. The next morning, I made a list. It wasn't anything fancy, just a list on a yellow legal pad with 3 columns. Things I want to let go of. Things I need to do. Things I want for myself. The first list filled up quickly. Resentment. Waiting for apologies. The hope that one day they'd treat me fairly. The second list took more time, but it grounded me. File for financial aid again and finish my degree. Pick up more freelance work. Fix my LinkedIn. Start therapy. And the third list? That one surprised me the most. I wanted a place with sunlight. I wanted to cook meals that weren't just for survival. I wanted to walk into a room and not flinch when someone raised their voice. I wanted peace. I taped the list to my fridge. And then I got to work. The first thing I did was call my university. I hadn't been enrolled in over 2 years, but they still had my credits on file. The academic advisor I spoke with was kind and efficient. She walked me through the re-enrollment process and even told me about a new grant program for returning students in financial recovery. I qualified. 2 weeks later, I was back in school, part-time at first, just one class to ease back in, but I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Momentum. Then I doubled down on my freelance work. I'd been doing odd tech gigs here and there, mostly web design, some digital marketing for small businesses, but I'd never treated it seriously. I always assumed it was temporary. Now, I treated it like a business. I redid my portfolio. I reached out to old clients. I offered package deals and referral discounts. Within a month, I had a steady rotation of projects. Within 3 months, I was making more from freelancing than I had working full-time at the retail job I'd taken to make ends meet. It wasn't flashy. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't announce my grind to the world. I just built. Quietly. Steadily. And the more I built, the more I noticed something strange. My health got better. Not in a magical way. I still had the condition, still took my meds, still had off days. But the stress, the exhaustion, the sense of drowning, it started to lift. My energy came back. I started sleeping through the night. My appetite returned. Therapy helped too. I found someone who specialized in family trauma and complex grief. I didn't even know grief applied to me until my therapist pointed it out. You're grieving the version of your parents you thought you had, she said. The version you hoped existed. That's real. And it's okay to grieve it, even if they're still alive. That hit harder than I expected. Week by week, I unpacked it all. The childhood disappointments, the chronic comparisons, the silence, the casual cruelty disguised as tough love. And slowly, I started to let go of the lie that it was my fault. My parents didn't fail me because I was too sensitive. They failed me because they chose to. That kind of realization doesn't bring relief, not at first. It brings grief, then anger, then, finally, freedom. A few months later, I got a call from Nathan. He hadn't reached out since the dinner. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hey, Jake," he said, his voice careful. "Got a minute?" "Not really," I said, honest. "But go ahead." He paused. "So, Rachel and I are planning the wedding. And Mom and Dad said you're not talking to them. And now they're saying they're not sure if they want to do the family photos if you're not in them. And it's turning into this whole thing." I raised an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see me. "So they care about appearances again. Shocking. Look, man, I get you're upset." "No, you don't," I said, cutting him off. "You don't get it. You've never had to get it." He sighed. "I'm not trying to fight." "Then what are you trying to do?" "I guess. I don't know. Keep the peace." That made me laugh. I couldn't help it. "Nate, there is no peace. There's just a pile of broken trust that everyone's trying to throw a tablecloth over. And I'm not doing that anymore." He was quiet. After a moment, he said, "So you're not coming?" I didn't answer right away. Then, "I haven't decided." And I hung up. I felt no guilt, no dread, just space. Space to decide what I wanted, not what they expected. By the time spring rolled around, I was in a different place. Emotionally, financially, mentally. I had a new client, a growing startup that needed ongoing design work. I'd aced my class and signed up for 2 more. My savings account was the healthiest it had ever been. And my therapist looked at me during one of our sessions and said, "You're not surviving anymore, Jake. You're living." I believed her. Still, there was one thing left that I hadn't decided on. The wedding. It was coming up fast, just under 2 months away. I hadn't RSVP'd. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the dinner. Nathan sent one more message, something half-hearted like, "Hope you can make it. Rachel's asking about table numbers." But the truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted to go. Not because I was angry, because I was done. Done playing a role in a family that only saw me when it was convenient. Done sitting at tables where I had to fight for scraps of basic decency. But then, something happened. Something that changed everything again. And this time, it wasn't a choice. It was a letter. A legal letter. And when I opened it, I felt my stomach drop. Because what it said, well, let's just say the wedding wasn't going to be the only thing happening that weekend. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a grocery coupon booklet and a late water bill. A plain white envelope, stiff and official, with my full name typed cleanly in the center and no return address. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a delayed medical notice or a credit offer from a bank I'd never heard of. But the moment I tore it open and scanned the first few lines, my fingers went cold. It was from an attorney. The letterhead read Kirkland & Associates, Estate Planning and Probate. And just below that, in sharp serif font, was a sentence that changed everything. "This notice pertains to the final estate wishes of Charles R. Langston, deceased, and the disbursement of assets as stipulated in the amended will dated March 5, 2017. My grandfather. I hadn't thought about Grandpa Charles in years. He died just before I started college. A quiet, stoic man who mostly kept to himself, but always had a kind word for me when we visited. I remember him slipping me a $50 bill on Christmas Eve once, just to see me smile. My parents always said he was old-fashioned and a bit too soft on Jake. I never asked what they meant by that. But now, 6 years after his death, I was getting a letter from his estate lawyer. I sat down at the kitchen table and read the whole thing twice. It turned out Grandpa Charles had made a quiet amendment to his will shortly before his passing. Apparently, he'd grown wary of how my parents favored Nathan. According to the letter, he'd even expressed grave concerns that my father would misuse his share of the inheritance. So, unbeknownst to the rest of the family, he set aside a separate account, one earmarked specifically for me. A trust. It wasn't massive, not some hidden fortune, but it was enough. Enough to change things. There was a clause, though. The funds would be accessible only upon one of 3 conditions. My graduation from college. Proof of financial hardship directly tied to a medical event. Written request for early access in cases of exceptional familial neglect. The lawyer's letter stated they'd just become aware of my recent situation through my aunt, my dad's sister, Carol. She had apparently shared my story after our phone call. The firm had reviewed the case and deemed the third condition met. All that was needed now was for me to sign a few documents and verify my identity. I would have full access to the trust in 30 days. The funds would be deposited into a new account, outside of my parents' reach. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the letter, heart pounding. He'd known. All those years ago, before the hospital stays, before the silence, before the folder on the dinner table, he saw it coming. Somehow, he saw what they were doing to me, what they would do, and he made a plan. I don't remember standing up, but I found myself pacing my apartment in slow circles, the letter still clutched in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just planned. Because if Grandpa Charles had faith in me enough to protect me from beyond the grave, I wasn't going to waste that. For the first time in my life, I had leverage, and I was going to use it. I started small, quiet, subtle. First, I called Aunt Carol. She answered on the first ring. "Jake," she said, her voice calm. "I was hoping you'd call. You sent the letter?" I told them your story. They did the rest. I paused. "Thank you." "You don't owe me thanks," she replied. "You deserve to be seen. And it's time someone in this family finally saw you." We spoke for over an hour. She filled in more gaps, things I hadn't known, like how my father had lied about me dropping out of school, telling relatives I was lazy and couldn't handle responsibility, or how he framed my medical issues as exaggerated and told people I was milking the sympathy card. He said all of this while funneling thousands into Nathan's lifestyle. "I never believed him," she said, "but I didn't know how bad it was until you told me." By the end of the call, I had something better than just an inheritance. I had an ally. And Aunt Carol? She had receipts, emails, text messages, voicemails my father had left her over the years, full of bragging, dismissive remarks about me, and even one where he laughed about using Jake's sob story to get a tax write-off for donating to a charity. "Wait, what charity?" I asked. She hesitated. "Some medical fund he said was yours. But I think he just used your name on the paperwork." I froze. "Do you have any documentation?" She did. She sent it. And there it was, my name, listed as a recipient of a $5,000 charitable gift my father claimed on his taxes. I had never seen a dime of it. That changed things. Dramatically. I forwarded the documents to the lawyer from the estate and asked if there were legal options. He responded within hours. What my father had done wasn't just immoral, it bordered on fraud. Tax fraud, to be specific. "If you want to pursue this," the lawyer wrote, "you have more than enough grounds to file a claim." I wasn't sure yet if I wanted to go that far, but I filed the email away in a folder titled Options. Meanwhile, the wedding was fast approaching. Rachel had finally messaged me herself, probably tired of Nathan's silence, and asked if I'd RSVP soon. She wrote in that polite, performative way people do when they're trying to avoid confrontation. "Hope you've been well, Jake. It would mean a lot to Nathan if you were there. He's stressed with all the planning, but we're trying to keep things light. Let us know if you'll be attending." I didn't reply. Instead, I started gathering more information. Carol wasn't the only family member who'd seen through the cracks. Over the next few weeks, I reached out to cousins, old family friends, even one of my mom's former coworkers. I asked quiet questions. I let them speak freely. And what I learned, it painted a damning picture. My parents had spent years curating a false narrative. To outsiders, they were doting parents with one son who struggled and another who made them proud. They told everyone I was always in trouble, always irresponsible, always looking for handouts. But in truth, I'd never borrowed money from them, never asked for gifts, never caused a scene. I just wasn't Nathan. That was my crime. And now I had the truth. I had their lies exposed, their secrets recorded, their good parent mask cracking. But I needed one last thing. A moment. The right moment. And it was coming. I learned from Rachel's Instagram that the rehearsal dinner would take place the night before the wedding, at the same venue they'd used for the engagement dinner. Classy, over the top, overpriced. Rachel had posted a story with the caption, "Can't believe it's almost here. Final touches for the dinner tonight." It was public. They expected me to come. So I decided I would. But not alone. I asked Aunt Carol if she'd come with me. Not just as support, but as backup. She agreed without hesitation. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet. Just that I wanted to say a few words. That I needed someone in my corner in case things got ugly. She said, "I've got your back. No matter what happens." I smiled. That's good. Because I'm not just showing up for dinner. She tilted her head. Then what are you showing up for? I opened my laptop. On the screen were 3 tabs. The lawyer's email detailing the trust. A drafted public letter to my family, outlining the truth. The PDF tax record of the fraudulent donation. I turned the screen toward her. She stared at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. And she smiled. Let's burn it all down. The night of the rehearsal dinner was warm, with a thick kind of summer humidity that clung to your skin no matter how slowly you moved. The restaurant was exactly as I remembered it. White tablecloths, ambient lighting, waiters in black vests and bow ties, and a view of the city skyline that probably added 30% to the bill. It was a place meant to impress, not to feel like home. I wore a navy suit, clean lines, tailored, subtle, not flashy, but sharp enough to show I wasn't the same kid from before. Aunt Carol arrived a few minutes after I did, in a dark green dress and a pair of silver earrings I remembered from my childhood. She used to wear them on holidays when she was feeling bold. She nodded to me, silent but ready. The hostess recognized me and ushered us toward the private room without hesitation. And just like that, I was back at the long table, the same one from 6 months earlier. Except this time, I wasn't sitting at the end, quietly sipping water, waiting to be noticed. This time, they noticed me immediately. Nathan did a double take mid-conversation. Rachel's smile stiffened when she saw Carol beside me. My parents exchanged a look, a subtle flicker of something behind their eyes. Panic? Discomfort? They recovered quickly. Dad stood. "Jake," he said, forcing a smile. "Glad you could make it." Mom chimed in. "It's so nice to see you. We weren't sure you'd come." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. "This is a family celebration, right?" Nathan stepped forward, holding a drink, his voice unsure. "Hey man, you look good." "You too," I said evenly. "Big weekend." Rachel smiled tightly. "We've got speeches tonight, so we're keeping it light. No drama, yeah?" "Of course," I said. "Wouldn't dream of causing a scene." She relaxed slightly, missing the edge in my tone. We sat down. Carol and I took seats close to the middle of the table this time. Conversation resumed, a bit stilted, but steady. Toasts were made, laughter was shared, and champagne glasses clinked. But I watched it all from a distance. Like a guest at a play, I already knew the ending too. When the main course was cleared, Rachel stood and tapped her glass. "All right, everyone. Before dessert, we thought it'd be nice to share a few words. Just some thoughts about family, love, and this new chapter." She gestured to Nathan, who rose and gave a short, nervous speech about partnership and gratitude. It was standard fare, well-meaning, a little awkward, but sincere. People clapped politely. He sat down and gave Rachel a nod. She smiled and turned to the group. "And now, Jake has something he'd like to share." There was a beat of confusion. My parents froze. Nathan blinked. Rachel looked back at me with an overly bright expression, the kind people wear when they're pretending not to be terrified. She didn't know I had planned to speak, but she assumed I'd behave. I stood up slowly and adjusted my jacket. "Thanks, Rachel. I'll keep it brief." I turned to face the table fully. All eyes on me now. The room had gone quiet. "I've spent the last few months thinking a lot about family," I began. "About what it means, what it doesn't mean, and what people are willing to do for the people they claim to love." Mom shifted in her seat. Dad's jaw tightened. "When I got sick a few years ago, I thought that was my rock bottom. But it wasn't the illness that broke me. It was the silence, the abandonment, being treated like an inconvenience while I was fighting to survive." A few people exchanged glances. Rachel looked confused. Nathan looked uncomfortable. I reached out to my parents for help. They ignored me. I begged. I got nothing. Meanwhile, they funded an engagement ring, a condo, and this dinner. And I stayed silent for years, thinking maybe it was my fault. Maybe I just didn't deserve help. Now the room was holding its breath. But then I found out something interesting. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder, sleeker than before, no frayed corners this time. I opened it and slid out a page, holding it up. This is a copy of a tax filing from 2 years ago. It shows a $5,000 charitable donation made in my name. My father claimed it was to help cover my medical bills. I never saw that money. Never even knew it existed. But it sure helped him come tax season. A few people gasped quietly. Nathan's face drained of color. "That's fraud," I said simply. Not just morally, but legally. And I have the documents to prove it. Dad stood up, face red. Jake, I'm not finished, I said, my voice calm. Please sit down. He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into his seat. I also have something else, I continued, pulling out a second document. A letter from my grandfather's estate lawyer. Turns out, he left me a trust, one that could only be accessed under very specific circumstances, one of which was, quote, exceptional familial neglect. I paused. After reviewing everything, the lawyers agreed. The trust has been released. I now have full control of the funds. Rachel's eyes widened. Nathan looked like he'd just swallowed a nail. I'm telling you all this, I said, because I'm done pretending, done being the quiet one, done being treated like I don't exist unless someone needs something. I turned to Rachel. I wish you and Nathan the best. Truly. But I won't be attending your wedding. I turned to my parents. And as for you, I've already filed a report with the IRS. You'll be hearing from them soon. You stole from me, and now you'll face the consequences. Mom covered her mouth. Dad opened and closed his mouth, but couldn't form words. I looked around the table, locking eyes with each person. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth and peace and claiming the space I should have had all along. I nodded to Aunt Carol, then turned and walked out. No one followed. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. A week later, my parents were contacted by the IRS. Aunt Carol confirmed it through the family grapevine. There were audits, phone calls, mounting legal fees. My father tried to spin it, said I was misinformed, but the documents spoke for themselves. The tax fraud charge stuck. They were fined, publicly embarrassed, and forced to repay the amount, with interest. My mother tried to reach out once, a clumsy email filled with half apologies and veiled accusations. I didn't respond. Nathan and Rachel still had their wedding, but I heard through the grapevine it was awkward, tense. Several relatives skipped it altogether. The photos looked stiff, the smiles forced. I didn't gloat. I just moved on. The trust allowed me to pay off my remaining medical debt. I finished school, launched my own design firm, and moved into a sunlit apartment across town. High ceilings, plants in every corner, and a kitchen I actually liked being in. Carol and I grew closer. She came over on Sundays for dinner. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we didn't. But she never once made me feel invisible. And me? I stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming. I stopped trying to fix a family that had never once tried to fix me. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't rage or cruelty. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be, without needing them at all. And that's exactly what I did.